My name is Charmaine, 35 years old, and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As a successful software developer, I escaped their toxicity but maintained occasional contact. Last Sunday, they invited me to an upscale brunch to catch up. Between mimosas and avocado toast, my mother leaned forward smirking. "You know, Charmaine, you are lucky we even include you. Pity goes a long way." I simply sipped my coffee and smiled. That night, I logged in, disabled every family credit account, and emailed my lawyer about selling the cabin. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in Fairfield, Connecticut meant privilege to outsiders. But inside our sprawling colonial home, emotional coldness permeated every corner. Our four-bedroom house with its manicured lawn and heated swimming pool was a fortress of expectations I could never quite meet. My childhood bedroom, painted pale blue at my mother Elaine's insistence despite my preference for green, became my sanctuary in prison. From elementary school through high school, I maintained straight as joined honor societies and poured every ounce of my energy into building a career that would make me completely untouchable. I funded their lavish lifestyles the moment I hit my first million, hoping to buy the genuine family connection I so deeply craved. But to truly understand how we reached that explosive Sunday brunch, and why I ultimately severed all ties, you have to understand the specific event that shattered my illusion of family. The true breaking point happened exactly 1 week prior. I had flown down to visit my parents for the first time in 5 long years. I had spent weeks planning this highly anticipated trip. I rented a massive 5-bedroom luxury rental property just 15 minutes from where they lived in the suburbs. I bought expensive gourmet groceries, meticulously stocking the refrigerator with my mother's favorite sparkling waters and my father's preferred cuts of prime steak. I wanted everything to be absolutely perfect for 7 consecutive days. I woke up early and sent cheerful text messages outlining our daily plans. For 7 consecutive days, they offered flimsy, dismissive excuses. "Chloe is having a minor crisis with her social media account, so we need to be there for her to help her film content. Trey is hosting an important networking event at his house, and we simply cannot miss it to support his vision. Tomorrow, Charmaine. We promise we will come over tomorrow." But tomorrow never came. For 7 consecutive nights, I cooked elaborate dinners. For 7 consecutive nights, I set the long mahogany dining table for 3 people. And for 7 consecutive nights, they never showed up. I stood in the massive gourmet kitchen of the rental house on the 7th night. The silence of the empty house was deafening, pressing against my ears, like a physical weight. The roasted lemon herb chicken I had carefully prepared was entirely cold, sitting untouched on the expensive ceramic serving platter. The savory gravy had congealed into a thick, unappetizing paste in the crystal bowl. I slowly reached out and picked up a pristine white porcelain dining plate from the flawlessly set table. My fingers gripped the smooth edges incredibly tightly, my knuckles turning stark white under the intense strain. 5 years away. 5 years of sending them thousands of dollars every single month. 5 years of paying for my sister Chloe to pretend she was a wealthy, self-made lifestyle influencer on the internet. I stared blankly at the empty wooden dining chairs. A sudden, razor-sharp wave of clarity washed over my entire body. I did not scream. I did not cry a single tear. I simply raised my hand and threw the heavy porcelain plate directly into the stainless steel sink. The loud, shattering sound echoed sharply through the quiet, empty house. Splinters of white ceramic scattered violently across the expensive, dark marble countertops. It was a remarkably beautiful sound. It sounded exactly like the sudden end of an era. Right at that moment, my cell phone vibrated aggressively on the kitchen island. The bright screen lit up the dim room, displaying a new text message notification from my mother, Elaine. I picked the device up and read the words that would officially sever our relationship forever. "Hey, sweetie. We are still at Chloe and Trey's house for the weekend barbecue. The weather is just too perfect to leave the swimming pool right now. By the way, your nephew's gaming console broke this morning, and he is throwing a terrible tantrum. Could you just cash app your sister $500 for a new one so we can get some peace and quiet? We will catch you next time you fly down. Safe travels back home. I read the text message twice to make sure I was not hallucinating. Then I read it a third time. There was absolutely no apology for missing dinner all week. There was no mention of the fact that I was getting on a long flight back to New York early the next morning. There was only a casual, cruel dismissal and a direct demand for cash. I was not a daughter to them. I was not a sister to Chloe. I was an automated teller machine. I was a blank checkbook they only bothered to open when they wanted to fund the golden child's perfect aesthetic lifestyle. I closed my eyes and took a very deep breath. When I opened them again, the desperate little girl who just wanted her mother's approval was completely dead. The woman standing in that kitchen was a senior executive software architect who managed multi-million-dollar corporate acquisitions daily. I unlocked my phone screen. I did not reply to her insulting message. Instead, I opened my contacts and dialed the direct line for my private wealth manager in New York. The phone rang twice before he picked up. "Good evening, Charmaine. It is a bit late on a Sunday. Is everything all right?" Jonathan asked. His voice was highly professional and immediately alert. "Everything is perfectly fine, Jonathan," I replied. My voice was steady, cold, and unnervingly calm. "I need to make some immediate administrative changes to my financial accounts. I need you to cancel 3 authorized user platinum credit cards attached to my primary account. I want them disabled immediately. Right this exact second." I could hear the rapid clicking of his computer keyboard in the quiet background. "Of course, Charmaine. Which cards are we canceling today?" "The cards issued to Elaine, my father Derek, and my sister Chloe. Flag them as permanently revoked by the primary account holder. I want you to freeze the credit limits and initiate a hard closure on those specific physical cards. If they try to swipe them at a restaurant, a luxury day spa, or a designer boutique, I want the terminal to decline the transaction immediately. I want the word declined flashing in bright red letters, no warnings, no grace periods, just a hard, embarrassing decline." Jonathan paused for a fraction of a second. "I am processing the cancellation right now. The cards ending in 4, 2, 8, 9, 7, 7, 0, 1 and 5, 5, 3, 2 have been officially deactivated. Is there anything else you need me to handle tonight before I log off?" "Yes," I said, leaning against the kitchen counter and staring at the shattered ceramic plate. "I need you to go into my scheduled outbound banking transfers. There is a recurring automatic clearinghouse payment set up for a Range Rover lease under the name Trey Washington. He is my brother-in-law who loves to pretend he is a self-made millionaire. He is currently leasing a luxury vehicle that costs $1,800 a month. Cancel that automatic transfer." I heard more rapid clicking over the line. "That transfer is scheduled to clear tomorrow morning, Charmaine. If I cancel it now, his auto lease payment will bounce and he will be hit with insufficient fund fees from his bank." "That sounds like a personal financial problem for Trey," I replied smoothly. "Cancel the transfer and block any future requests from his banking institution." "Consider it done," Jonathan said. "Your accounts are completely locked down. Have a good evening." I ended the call and slipped the phone into my pocket. The physical relief that washed over my body was intoxicating. I walked into the master bedroom, pulled my heavy suitcase from the closet, and began tossing my clothes inside. As I zipped the leather bag shut and walked toward the front door, my phone began to vibrate violently. The screen flashed with my mother's name. She was panic calling. I stared at the screen, a cold smile touching my lips. I pressed decline, grabbed my bags, and stepped outside into the waiting Uber. Exactly 1 month passed since that fateful morning at the airport. The brisk autumn air of Manhattan was a stark contrast to the stifling humidity of Atlanta, both physically and emotionally. I sat at my sleek mahogany desk in my corner office, overlooking the sprawling concrete jungle of the financial district. The transition from the discarded daughter to the apex predator was fully complete. I had spent the last 4 weeks meticulously analyzing every single financial document related to my brother-in-law Trey and his crumbling real estate empire. My team had worked around the clock aggressively, acquiring his debt portfolio, from various panicked lenders who were desperate to offload the toxic assets. At precisely 10 o'clock in the morning, my executive assistant Sarah knocked softly on my thick glass door. She stepped into the office looking incredibly uncomfortable. She was holding her personal tablet tightly against her chest. "Good morning, Charmaine," she said tentatively. "I am so sorry to interrupt your contract review, but I think there is something you really need to see right now. It is currently trending on several social media platforms." I put down my expensive fountain pen and leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair. "Show me," I instructed calmly. Sarah placed the tablet on my desk and pressed play on a recorded Instagram live video. The screen instantly filled with the perfectly contoured face of my older sister Chloe. She was sitting in what looked like the impeccably decorated living room of her expensive suburban home. She was wearing a stunning silk designer blouse that I had purchased for her birthday just 3 months ago. Her perfectly manicured hands were aggressively wiping away non-existent tears from her heavily made-up eyes. Chloe took a deep, trembling breath for maximum dramatic effect before speaking to her thousands of loyal followers. "Hey guys," she began, her voice quivering with fake vulnerability. "I just wanted to hop on here and have a really raw, honest conversation with you all today. A lot of you have been asking why my family has not been featured in my recent lifestyle vlogs. The truth is, we are going through a massive family crisis right now." She paused, biting her lower lip exactly the way she had practiced in the mirror since childhood. "It is just so incredibly painful to realize that someone you grew up with, someone you loved and supported unconditionally, could turn out to be so deeply toxic. My own sister, who makes millions of dollars working on Wall Street, has completely abandoned our aging parents. She cut them off financially without any warning, just because she is jealous of my success and my beautiful marriage to Trey. She is sitting in her fancy New York penthouse letting our parents suffer. It just goes to show that all the corporate money in the world cannot buy you a decent heart. Please protect your peace, guys. Toxic siblings are real." The comments scrolling rapidly at the bottom of the video were absolutely brutal. Thousands of strangers were fiercely defending my sister, calling me a narcissistic monster, a greedy sellout, and a disgrace to the community. They were blindly demanding that I be publicly exposed and cancelled for my supposedly horrific treatment of my loving family. Sarah reached forward and quickly paused the video, looking at me with wide, terrified eyes. "Charmaine, I can have the legal department draft a cease and desist letter immediately," she offered, her voice shaking slightly. "This is clear defamation. She is damaging your personal reputation and implying terrible things about your character." I stared at the frozen image of my sister's fake, tearful face. A slow, genuine smile spread across my lips. "No, Sarah," I said, my tone shockingly light. "Let her keep talking. Let her paint herself as the ultimate victim. The higher the pedestal she builds for herself on the internet, the harder the impact will be when I finally kick the foundation out from under her. You do not interrupt your enemy when they are in the process of destroying themselves." Sarah nodded slowly, picking up the tablet. "Are you absolutely sure, Charmaine? People are being incredibly cruel in those comment sections. The opinions of internet strangers who fund their lives through credit card debt do not concern me," I replied smoothly. "You can return to your desk, Sarah. Do not monitor her social media anymore. We have an actual corporation to run." As Sarah left the office, my personal cell phone began vibrating violently across the smooth surface of my desk. The social media smear campaign had officially activated the flying monkeys. I picked up the phone and looked at the glowing screen. I had 24 missed calls and 14 new voicemails. They were all from various aunts, uncles, and cousins back in Atlanta, who had clearly just watched Chloe's performance. I tapped the screen and played the first voicemail on speakerphone. It was my cousin Darius. "Charmaine, what the hell is wrong with you?" His angry voice echoed through my quiet office. "Aunt Elaine is in tears because of what you did. You think because you live in a big city and wear expensive suits, you are suddenly better than the people who raised you. You need to call your sister right now, apologize, and fix this mess. You are embarrassing the entire family name." I deleted the message before he even finished his self-righteous rant. I played the next one. This time it was my Aunt Beatrice. Beatrice was the undisputed matriarch of the family gossip mill. She thrived on drama and positioned herself as the moral authority of our entire bloodline. Charmaine Denise. She barked into the phone, her voice dripping with pure disgust. I just saw what your sister posted on the internet. I am absolutely appalled by your behavior. Your parents sacrificed everything to give you a good life, and this is how you repay them. Trey is working tirelessly to build a legacy for our family, and you refuse to help him out during a minor financial rough patch. You are a cold, heartless woman. Do not you dare show your face at the family reunion this year until you make this right. I calmly deleted her message as well. It was truly fascinating to watch how quickly they all rallied behind the golden child. None of them called to ask for my side of the story. None of them questioned why a supposedly wealthy and successful influencer needed financial assistance from her estranged younger sister. They simply swallowed the lie because it perfectly fit the narrative my parents had established decades ago. Chloe was the beautiful, perfect angel, and I was the difficult, ungrateful workaholic. I silenced my phone and tossed it into my desk drawer. Let them leave their angry voicemails. Let them gossip at their Sunday church services. They were entirely oblivious to the massive financial guillotine that was currently hanging over their heads. My office door opened again. This time it was Victoria, my lead director of acquisitions. She looked sharp, focused, and completely unbothered by the petty family drama that was blowing up my phone. She walked briskly across the room and dropped a massive leather-bound folder directly onto the center of my desk. The acquisition is officially complete. Charmaine, Victoria announced, her voice radiating professional triumph. We successfully negotiated the buyout of Trey Washington's entire commercial debt portfolio from Apex Capital Solutions. The original lenders were absolutely thrilled to dump the toxic assets. They took a slight loss on the premium, but we secured the primary liens. All the legal documents have been aggressively vetted by our internal counsel and filed with the appropriate state authorities. I opened the heavy folder and slowly turned the crisp white pages. The numbers printed in bold black ink were staggering. Trey owed over $1.2 million. His company was entirely insolvent. But the most beautiful document in the entire folder was the final page. It was the original guarantor agreement signed by my father Derek and co-signed by my mother Elaine. It clearly stated that in the event of a total default, the creditor had the absolute legal right to seize the collateral asset. The collateral asset was their sprawling suburban home, the house I grew up in. I pulled my expensive fountain pen from its resting place. I flipped to the signature page of the acquisition transfer. With 3 swift, elegant strokes of my pen, I officially bound my holding company as the sole owner of the debt. I placed the pen down and looked up at Victoria. "It is done," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I now legally own my brother-in-law's failing business. I own his leased vehicles. I own the camera equipment my sister uses to film her pathetic videos. And most importantly, I hold the absolute power to foreclose on my parents' house at any given moment." Victoria offered a small, knowing smile. "You hold all the cards, Charmaine? How exactly do you want to proceed? Do we send the standard default notices to his business address? Do we initiate the preliminary asset seizure protocol?" I shook my head slowly, closing the heavy leather folder. "No, Victoria. We do not send him a single piece of mail. We do not give him the luxury of a warning. I want him to believe he got away with it. I want him to think the bank simply lost his paperwork in an administrative shuffle. We are going to wait until the perfect moment to drop this bomb. I want maximum collateral damage." "Understood," Charmaine, Victoria replied, picking up the folder. "I will secure these documents in the main vault. Nobody breathes a word of this to the outside world." As Victoria turned to leave, my desk phone chimed loudly. It was the internal line connecting directly to the main security desk down in the lobby. I pressed the flashing button and answered. "Yes, what is it?" I asked, maintaining my professional composure. "Ms. Charmaine." The deep voice of the head security guard crackled through the speaker. "I am very sorry to disturb you, but we have a highly agitated individual down here in the main lobby. She bypassed the visitor registration desk and is currently screaming at the receptionists. She claims to be your aunt and is demanding that you come down here immediately. She says she is not leaving this building until you answer for your crimes against your family. My blood ran completely cold and then instantly boiled. I stood up from my desk, walking over to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the tiny yellow taxicabs moving through the New York streets below. My family had truly lost their minds. They thought they could bring their toxic Atlanta drama into my corporate sanctuary. What is the name of the individual causing the disturbance? I asked, my voice eerily calm. She says her name is Beatrice, the security guard replied, sounding incredibly annoyed. And she is currently threatening to call the local news stations if you do not come down here to face her right now. Send her up to my floor, I commanded without a single second of hesitation. Have 2 security officers escort her directly to my office and wait outside the door. It seems my aunt wants a confrontation today. I am going to give her exactly what she is asking for. I ended the call and smoothed the wrinkles from my tailored suit jacket. The smear campaign had moved from the internet to my front door. It was time to show Aunt Beatrice the absolute truth. I stood behind my massive mahogany desk and waited for the heavy glass doors of my executive suite to swing open. Within less than 2 minutes, the loud sound of my aunt's voice echoed down the quiet, carpeted hallway. She was loudly lecturing the 2 large security guards who were escorting her, demanding they take their hands off her designer coat. Aunt Beatrice marched into my office like a general stepping onto a conquered battlefield. She was wearing her finest Sunday church suit, a bright purple ensemble complete with a matching wide-brimmed hat. The sheer audacity of her presence in my corporate sanctuary was almost amusing, but I kept my face entirely impassive. You have some serious nerve making me wait down in that lobby? Charmaine Beatrice spat, pointing a manicured finger directly at my face. The security guards lingered awkwardly in the doorway, waiting for my command. I gave them a brief nod and they stepped out, pulling the glass door shut behind them, leaving us entirely alone in the soundproof room. I gestured calmly toward one of the leather guest chairs. Please sit down, Aunt Beatrice, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. You have traveled a very long way just to yell at me. I imagine your feet must be tired. Do not you dare patronize me, she yelled, refusing to sit down. She paced back and forth in front of my desk, her purple hat bobbing with every angry step. I saw what your sister posted this morning. The entire family saw it. The entire church congregation saw it. You should be absolutely ashamed of yourself, sitting up here in this glass tower, while your own parents are struggling to keep their heads above water. You have completely lost your way, Charmaine. You let all this money turn your heart into a block of solid ice. I leaned against the edge of my desk, crossing my arms loosely over my chest. And what exactly did Chloe tell you? I asked, feigning mild curiosity. Beatrice stopped pacing and glared at me with pure righteous indignation. She told us the truth, Beatrice declared proudly. She told us how you coldly canceled the emergency credit cards. She told us how you refused to help Trey when his business hit a minor snag. But most importantly, she reminded us of who the real heart of this family is. Chloe has always been the one to step up when things get difficult. She does not just throw money at problems like you do. She actually cares. I raised a single eyebrow. Is that so? I replied softly. And how exactly does Chloe show this deep, unwavering care for the family? Beatrice placed both hands on her hips, looking at me as if I were the most dense person on the planet. Are you really that blind? She scoffed. Last year, when I had to have my emergency gallbladder surgery, my medical insurance refused to cover the out-of-network surgeon. I was terrified. I thought I was going to lose my house just to pay the hospital bills. But your sister stepped up. Chloe used her hard-earned social media sponsorship money to pay my entire medical bill out of her own pocket. $14,000, Charmaine. She paid it in full and she never asked me for a single dime in return. Where were you when I was lying in that hospital bed? You did not even bother to send me a get-well card. You just ignored my suffering completely. I stared at my aunt for a long, silent moment. The absolute conviction in her voice was fascinating. Chloe had truly spun a masterful web of lies. My sister had not only stolen my money, but she had successfully weaponized it to buy the loyalty and adoration of our entire extended family. I slowly walked around to the front of my desk and picked up my desk phone. I pressed the intercom button for my assistant. Sarah, I said calmly, Please print the archived financial document from my personal encrypted drive. File name is Atlanta Medical Transfer, November of last year. Bring it in immediately. Beatrice narrowed her eyes at me. What are you doing? She demanded. Are you trying to intimidate me with your corporate lawyers? Because it is not going to work. I fear the Lord, not some fancy Manhattan attorney. I am not trying to intimidate you, Aunt Beatrice, I replied, leaning back against the mahogany wood. I am simply going to cure you of your absolute ignorance. The office door opened, and Sarah walked in holding a single piece of high-quality printer paper. She handed it to me without a word and quickly exited the room. I looked at the paper, verifying the details. The bank logo was printed clearly at the top. The transaction ID, the routing numbers, the exact time and date stamps were all perfectly legible. I took 2 steps forward and held the piece of paper out toward my aunt. Beatrice looked at it suspiciously before snatching it from my hand. Read it aloud, I instructed, my voice turning slightly colder. Read every single line of that document, Beatrice. She pulled a pair of reading glasses from her purple purse and shoved them onto her face. Her eyes scanned the top of the page. It is a bank wire transfer confirmation, she said dismissively. From your personal wealth management account. So what? Keep reading. I pushed, stepping closer to her. Look at the destination account and the exact dollar amount. Beatrice frowned, her eyes darting down the page. Destination account is listed as Atlanta General Hospital Billing Department. The memo line says payment in full for patient Beatrice Washington. Her voice suddenly faltered. She stopped reading aloud. I watched the blood slowly drain from her face. The bright purple of her hat suddenly looked incredibly vibrant against her ashen skin. The amount, Aunt Beatrice, I pressed, my tone completely unforgiving. Read the exact amount of the transfer. $14,250, she whispered, her voice barely audible in the quiet room. Her hands began to tremble slightly, causing the thick paper to rattle. It was processed on November 12th. That was the exact day before my surgery. I let the silence hang heavily in the air, allowing the devastating reality of the document to crush her righteous anger. That is correct, I finally said, stepping back. $14,250. Paid directly from my personal account to the hospital billing department. I sent it anonymously through my mother because I did not want you to feel indebted to me. I just wanted you to get the surgery you desperately needed. Beatrice looked up at me, her eyes wide with total confusion and dawning horror. But Chloe told everyone she paid it. She stammered. She said she got a massive brand deal with a cosmetics company and used the advance to clear my debt. My mother called me crying, saying Chloe had saved my life. Your mother lied, I stated bluntly. And your beloved niece lied. Chloe did not pay for your surgery, Beatrice. Chloe has not had a paying brand sponsorship in over 2 years. Her entire lifestyle is funded by the credit cards I just canceled. She took credit for my money to play the hero, and you all eagerly bought the tickets to her little theatrical performance. Beatrice stared at the piece of paper as if it had suddenly caught fire. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The fierce, gossiping matriarch of the family had been completely stripped of her moral high ground. All the venomous voicemails she had left me, all the terrible things she had said about me to the church congregation, they were all based on a massive calculated lie manufactured by the Golden Child. The next time you decide to march into my office and accuse me of abandoning my family, I suggest you bring a thank you card instead, I said, my voice slicing through the quiet room like a freshly sharpened blade. I will not tolerate being lectured by people who blindly worship a fraud. You can keep that piece of paper, Aunt Beatrice. Take it back to Atlanta, show it to the rest of the family. Or keep it to yourself to protect Chloe's precious reputation. I honestly do not care what you do with it anymore. Beatrice slowly folded the piece of paper, her hands shaking violently. She looked utterly defeated. The aggressive fire in her eyes had been entirely extinguished, replaced by a deep, humiliating shame. She opened her mouth to speak, perhaps to apologize, but I cut her off. My security guards will escort you back down to the lobby, I said, gesturing toward the door. Have a safe flight back home, Aunt Beatrice. And please tell Chloe her acting skills are truly remarkable. She should consider a career in Hollywood once her fake influencer empire completely collapses. Aunt Beatrice did not say a single word. She turned around, her shoulders slumped heavily, and walked slowly out of my office. She looked 10 years older than when she had marched in. I watched the heavy glass door swing shut behind her, feeling an immense wave of satisfaction. Destroying their false narrative was even more intoxicating than acquiring a multi-million-dollar company. I walked back to my desk and picked up my expensive pen, ready to review the final details of Trey's debt portfolio. But before the nib of the pen could even touch the contract paper, my desk phone lit up again. I sighed and pressed the intercom button. "Sarah, what is it now?" I asked. "Has another relative arrived to yell at me?" "Actually, Charmaine," Sarah said, her voice sounding slightly panicked. "The lobby security team just called up again. They are dealing with a situation in the executive parking garage beneath the building. A man managed to tailgate one of our senior partners through the private security gate. He is refusing to leave the premises. He told the guards his name is Trey Washington. He claims he is your brother-in-law, and he is aggressively demanding that you come down to the garage right now. The guard said he looks completely desperate, and he is shouting that he needs $200,000 immediately, or he is going to make a massive scene." I slowly placed my pen back onto the mahogany desk. A cold, razor-sharp smile spread across my face. Aunt Beatrice had just been the opening act. The main event had finally arrived in New York. "Tell the security team to stand down, Sarah," I instructed, my voice dangerously calm. "Tell them to keep him contained in the lower level of the garage. I will be down there in exactly 5 minutes to handle Mr. Washington personally. Let the games begin." The elevator doors slid shut, cutting off the noise. I pressed the button for the lower-level parking garage, watching the digital numbers count down. The polished steel reflected my tailored suit and calm expression. Aunt Beatrice had been driven by misguided loyalty and foolish gossip, but Trey was an entirely different breed of parasite. He was driven by pure, unadulterated desperation. The financial walls were closing in on him, and he had flown to New York to squeeze blood from a stone. The elevator chimed, and the heavy metal doors parted, revealing the dimly lit expanse of the garage. My designated parking spot was located near the security booth, but I spotted him pacing between two concrete pillars. Trey Washington was a man who obsessed over presenting an alpha male image to the world. But the man pacing in my parking garage looked completely unraveled. The moment he heard the click of my heels against the concrete, he stopped pacing and whipped his head in my direction. He marched toward me with menacing aggression. But I stood my ground, holding my briefcase and staring at him as if he were a stray dog on my property. "Charmaine," he barked, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Tell these rent-a-cops to back off right now." The two security guards stationed near the booth took a step forward, hands near their belts ready to intervene. I raised a single hand, giving them the signal to hold their position. They nodded and stepped back but kept their eyes locked on Trey. "You have exactly 3 minutes to explain why you are trespassing on corporate property, Trey," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously calm octave. "And you better lower your voice before I have you arrested for harassment." Trey ran a shaky hand over his head, his chest heaving as he tried to regain his arrogant composure. "I am not leaving the city until you write me a check," he demanded, pointing a finger toward my face. "I need $200,000 wired directly into my business account by the end of the day. I do not want to hear any of your typical financial lectures. I do not want to hear any excuses. You have the money, and I need it right now." I let out a sharp, amused laugh. The sheer audacity of his demand was impressive. "You break into my building, you scream at my security staff, and you demand $200,000 as if ordering a fast food meal," I replied, shaking my head. "You have truly lost your mind, Trey. You are completely delusional." He took another step closer, invading my personal space. The scent of stale airport coffee and nervous sweat radiated off his suit. "I am not playing games with you, Charmaine," he hissed through clenched teeth. "I am a chief executive officer handling multi-million-dollar development projects. I just hit a temporary liquidity issue because a major investor pulled out at the last minute. It is just a temporary cash flow problem. If you front me the $200,000, I can bridge the gap and save my company. You make that much money in a single week. It is pocket change to you." I looked him up and down, analyzing every micro-expression of panic on his face. "You are not a chief executive officer?" Trey, I stated coldly, stripping away his beloved title. "You are a glorified con artist who uses my parents' money to lease expensive cars and buy fake followers for your wife. A real businessman does not fly across the country to beg his estranged sister-in-law for a bailout. A real businessman secures legitimate funding. I am not giving you $200,000. I am not giving you 200 pennies. Your financial mismanagement is not my responsibility. Now turn around, walk out of this garage, and go back to Atlanta before I have you forcibly removed." The veins in Trey's neck bulged, and his face contorted into an ugly mask of rage. He realized his aggressive alpha male routine was failing. He could not intimidate me, and he could not bully me. So he quickly pivoted to his ultimate trump card. The blackmail he was absolutely certain would force my hand. He let out a harsh, breathless chuckle, stepping back and crossing his arms. His arrogant smirk slowly returned, though it looked fragile and desperate. "You are going to give me that money, Charmaine," he sneered, his voice dripping with malicious confidence. "You are going to wire it to me today, because if you do not, you will be the reason your precious mommy and daddy end up sleeping on the street." I maintained my perfectly blank expression, not giving him a single ounce of the reaction he was seeking. "What exactly are you talking about?" I asked, feigning mild ignorance. Trey grinned, believing he had backed me into an inescapable corner. "My commercial loan is secured by a collateral asset," he explained, speaking slowly as if explaining a simple concept to a child. "And since I did not have enough equity, your parents stepped up to help their favorite son-in-law. Derek and Elaine co-signed my loan. They leveraged their retirement fund and placed a secondary lien on their house to guarantee my business venture. If my company goes under today, the bank does not just take my business. The bank seizes their house. The bank takes every single penny they have saved for 40 years." He took a triumphant step forward, tapping his temple with his index finger. "You see, Charmaine, I know exactly how you operate. You might pretend to be this cold, heartless Wall Street shark who does not care about anyone, but I know the truth. You spent the last 5 years paying their bills just to buy their love. You crave their approval like a starving dog. You would never let them lose the family home. You would never let them become homeless. So you are going to write me that check right now, because it is the only way to save them." The silence in the underground garage was profound. He stood there with a smug, victorious expression, convinced he had brilliantly outmaneuvered a senior corporate acquisitions director. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my car keys. I pressed the unlock button, and the headlights of my black luxury sedan flashed in the dim garage, illuminating Trey's sweating face. I walked past him, heading directly toward my vehicle. "You are an incredibly stupid man, Trey," I said, my voice echoing softly off the concrete walls. "You build your entire life on lies and assume everyone else is as foolish as the people you manipulate in Atlanta." He spun around, clearly confused by my lack of panic. "Did you not hear a single word I just said?" he yelled, his voice cracking with sudden anxiety. "They will lose the house, Charmaine. The bank will foreclose on them. You have to bail me out." I opened the driver's side door of my car and paused, resting my hand lightly on the metal frame. I looked back at him, my eyes completely devoid of any human warmth. "I heard every single word you said, Trey," I replied smoothly. "But you clearly do not understand how corporate debt restructuring actually works. I suggest you go back to your hotel room, log into your business portal, and read the fine print on exactly who bought your commercial loan last week." Trey's jaw dropped slightly, his eyes widening in total confusion. "What?" he stammered, taking a hesitant step toward my car. "What do you mean, who bought the loan? The original bank holds the paper." "No, Trey." I smiled, a slow, terrifying smile that finally made the blood drain entirely from his face. "The original bank sold your highly toxic debt to a private holding company. A holding company that I personally control. You came all the way to New York to threaten me with a foreclosure that I currently have the legal authority to execute. I am your majority creditor. I own your debt, I own your company, and I own the lien on my parents' house. Before he could even process the catastrophic disaster he had walked blindly into, I slid elegantly into the leather driver's seat of my sedan. I pulled the heavy door shut, cutting off the sound of his ragged breathing. Through the tinted glass window, I watched his facial muscles collapse as the terrifying reality finally washed over him. He was entirely at my mercy. I started the engine, the very powerful motor purring smoothly in the quiet underground space. I shifted the car into drive and slowly pulled away, leaving Trey standing completely alone, frozen in the shadowy darkness of the parking garage. The emotional war was now rapidly escalating, but I had already secured the absolute high ground. The emotional war was now rapidly escalating, but I had already secured the absolute high ground. I drove up the spiraling concrete ramp of the parking garage and merged into the chaotic afternoon traffic of Manhattan. My heart rate was completely steady. The look of utter devastation on Trey's face was burned into my memory, and it provided a profound sense of vindication. For years, he had paraded around family gatherings, treating me like a naive piggy bank while disrespecting my career. Now he finally understood the terrifying reality of my world. I navigated the busy streets and headed directly back to my luxury penthouse apartment overlooking the city's skyline. I needed a quiet space to strategize my next move. As soon as I walked through my front door, I bypassed the kitchen and went straight to my home office. I opened my secure laptop and initiated a video conference call with Victoria and my lead corporate attorney, Marcus. Their faces appeared on my large monitor within seconds, looking alert and ready for instructions. "Good afternoon," Charmaine, Marcus said, adjusting his glasses. "Victoria informed me about the successful acquisition of the Washington real estate debt portfolio. The legal transfer is fully executed on our end. We hold the primary liens on all his commercial properties, and more importantly, we hold the secondary lien on the residential collateral located in Atlanta." "Excellent work, Marcus," I replied, leaning back in my chair. "Now I need to establish the precise parameters of our enforcement strategy. Has the original lending institution officially notified Trey of the debt transfer yet?" Victoria shook her head. "No, Charmaine," she confirmed. "We explicitly requested a delay in the administrative notification process. According to standard regulatory guidelines, we have a 30-day window before we are legally required to send the formal change of creditor notice to his registered business address. I want you to use every single day of that 30-day window," I instructed, my voice sharp and calculated. "Do not send him a single email. Do not send any physical letters. Do not initiate any collection calls. I want absolute radio silence from our firm. Trey is currently in a state of extreme panic because of what I told him in the garage today. He knows I hold the debt, but he does not know when or how I'm going to strike. I want him to sweat. I want him to return to Atlanta and look my parents in the eyes knowing he has doomed them all." Marcus frowned slightly, clearly confused by the personal nature of my request. "It is highly unusual to delay the demand for payment on a defaulted account of this magnitude," he warned cautiously. "From a purely financial perspective, we should immediately freeze his remaining business assets and file the preliminary foreclosure paperwork on the residential collateral. If we give him time, he might try to declare bankruptcy or hide liquid capital." "He has no liquid capital to hide, Marcus," I stated confidently. "I have already reviewed his complete financial profile. The man is drowning in liabilities. He is entirely cornered. And as for the residential collateral, that house belongs to my parents. I have a very specific timeline for how I want this entire situation to unfold. You will hold all legal actions until I give the explicit command to execute the trap. Prepare the asset seizure documents and the foreclosure notices, but keep them locked in your vault. When I say drop the hammer, I want it dropped with maximum corporate force." "Understood." Marcus nodded slowly, sensing the deep personal gravity of the situation. "We will hold the perimeter and await your final orders." I ended the video call and closed my laptop. The trap was perfectly set. The heavy steel doors had locked shut, and the entire Washington family was standing inside the cage without even realizing it. The next few days passed in absolute silence. It was a deafening, tense quiet that vibrated with unspoken hostility. None of my relatives called me. My mother did not send any passive-aggressive text messages. Chloe was entirely absent from social media, having paused her ridiculous influencer posts after Aunt Beatrice returned to Atlanta with the medical wire transfer receipts. The fake foundation of their perfect family was rapidly crumbling, and they were currently in damage control mode. I knew exactly what they were doing. They were holding secret family meetings in my parents' living room, trying to figure out a way to neutralize me. Trey had undoubtedly rushed back to Atlanta and confessed the catastrophic truth to Derek and Elaine. He had to tell them that I bought the commercial loan. He had to warn them that their beloved house was currently resting in the palm of my hand. I could only imagine the sheer panic that must have gripped my mother when she realized her discarded daughter was now her ultimate landlord. On Thursday evening, exactly 4 days after the garage incident, my personal cell phone finally rang. I was sitting on my velvet sofa sipping a glass of expensive red wine and reading a novel. I glanced at the screen resting on the coffee table. The caller ID displayed my father Derek. A cold smile touched my lips. The silence was officially broken. They had formulated their plan, and Derek was the designated messenger. I let the phone ring 4 times before slowly picking it up and answering. "Hello, Derek," I said, skipping the traditional family pleasantries. There was a brief, heavy pause on the other end of the line. He was likely taken aback by my use of his first name instead of calling him Dad. "Charmaine, baby," he finally said, his voice dripping with forced warmth and artificial affection. "It has been a very long week. How are you holding up in the big city?" I took a slow sip of my wine, tasting the rich, dark fruit notes. "I am exceptionally well, Derek," I replied, my tone completely flat. "Business is booming. My portfolio is expanding rapidly. What can I do for you tonight? I doubt you called just to ask about my well-being." He let out a nervous chuckle. The sound strained and entirely unnatural. "You always were a straight shooter, Charmaine. Just like your old man. Listen. I am calling because we need to clear the air. This entire situation has gotten completely out of hand. Your mother is sick with worry, Chloe is stressed out, and Trey is deeply regretful about how he approached you in New York. We are a family, Charmaine. We should not be fighting like this." I remained completely silent, allowing his desperate words to hang in the empty space. When I did not offer any reassurance, he quickly continued pushing forward with his rehearsed script. "Anyway, my 60th birthday is this coming Sunday," he announced, trying to sound cheerful. "We are hosting a massive Sunday dinner at the house. The whole family will be there. Aunt Beatrice, Uncle George, your cousins, everyone. I want you to fly down and be there, Charmaine. I want all my girls under one roof for my milestone birthday. We want to put all this silliness behind us and start fresh." The sheer audacity of the invitation was almost breathtaking. They were calling the potential foreclosure of their home and the theft of my money silliness. They wanted me to simply forgive and forget because they were terrified of the consequences. But beneath the fake, cheerful invitation, I could hear the sharp edge of manipulation. I knew exactly what this Sunday dinner really was. It was a trap. They believed that if they could get me back into that house surrounded by the entire extended family, they could use emotional blackmail and peer pressure to force me to sign away my legal rights to Trey's debt. They were going to ambush me at the dinner table. They were going to serve a beautiful meal, say a lengthy prayer, and then slide a legal waiver across the table, expecting me to forgive the $1 million loan for the sake of the family legacy. They still thought I was the desperate little girl who just wanted a seat at their table. I stared at the thick manila folder resting on my glass coffee table. It contained the original guarantor paperwork bearing Derek's signature. He had literally gambled his own shelter on a fool, and now he wanted me to absorb the massive financial loss to save his pride. I slowly traced the edge of the folder with my index finger. "A Sunday dinner," I mused softly, my voice carrying a hint of dangerous amusement. "Just like the 7 Sunday dinners you all completely ignored last month." "Oh, Charmaine, please do not hold on to the past," Derek pleaded quickly, his voice thick with desperation. "We made a terrible mistake that week. We were distracted, and we treated you poorly. But this is my 60th birthday. It is a major milestone. Please come home. Give us a chance to make it right." I closed my eyes, visualizing the grand dining room in Atlanta. I pictured the expensive chandeliers, the fine china, and the hypocritical faces of the people who shared my blood. They wanted a family reunion. They were going to get a corporate execution. "I will be there, Derek," I said, my voice dropping to a smooth, icy calm. "I will book my flight for Saturday morning. Tell Mother to prepare her best recipes. I am very much looking forward to seeing everyone again." "Oh, thank God," Derek exhaled heavily, sounding as though a massive weight had been lifted off his chest. "You have no idea how happy that makes me, Charmaine. We are going to have a wonderful time. We love you, baby. See you on Sunday." I ended the call without returning the sentiment. I placed the phone back onto the table and picked up the guarantor documents. I read the legal clauses detailing the absolute right of asset seizure in the event of default. They thought they were luring a wounded deer back into the woods, but they were actually inviting a starving wolf into their living room. I finished my glass of wine and began mentally packing my bags. The war was moving back to Atlanta, and this time I was not going to leave until the entire fake empire was burned completely to the ground. Saturday morning arrived with a crisp chill in the Manhattan air. I wore a tailored emerald green suit, the exact color my mother had forbidden me from painting my childhood bedroom. It was a subtle act of rebellion, but today was all about symbolism. I locked my penthouse and took the private elevator down to the waiting town car. The drive to John F. Kennedy International Airport was quiet. My mind was razor-sharp, perfectly focused on the execution of my corporate strategy. I bypassed the main terminal and headed straight for the private luxury lounge. I sat in a high-backed leather chair sipping black coffee and running my fingers over the smooth leather of my briefcase. Inside that briefcase was the absolute destruction of the Washington family facade. The flight to Atlanta was incredibly smooth. I spent the 2 hours in the air reviewing the final legal memorandums drafted by Marcus and Victoria. Every single loophole had been permanently sealed. Trey's business was completely insolvent. The predatory loan he had taken out was actively in default. The secondary lien on my parents' house was legally binding and fully transferred to my holding company. I looked out the small airplane window as we descended through the clouds over Georgia. For 32 years, I had viewed this city as a place of emotional starvation. It was the place where my achievements were ignored so my sister's mediocre milestones could be celebrated. Today I was returning not as a desperate daughter seeking validation, but as the undisputed owner of their entire reality. I landed, retrieved my luggage, and picked up my rental vehicle. I purposely selected a blacked-out luxury SUV, a vehicle that commanded immediate authority. The drive from the airport to the affluent northern suburbs took roughly 45 minutes. As I navigated the familiar winding roads lined with towering oak trees and perfectly manicured lawns, a strange sense of detachment washed over me. I was driving through a neighborhood of millionaires and people who desperately pretended to be millionaires. My parents fell firmly into the latter category. They had purchased their sprawling colonial home at the absolute height of the market, determined to project an image of black excellence to their peers. I turned onto my parents' street and slowly approached the house. The wide, circular driveway was packed with expensive vehicles. I immediately spotted Trey's leased Range Rover sitting proudly near the front door. The automatic bank transfer for that vehicle had already bounced twice this week, resulting in massive penalty fees, but Trey was still parading it around as a status symbol. Parked right next to it was Chloe's pristine white luxury crossover. I pulled my SUV onto the edge of the manicured lawn, shifted into park, and turned off the engine. I took one final deep breath, adjusting the lapels of my emerald suit. I grabbed my leather briefcase and stepped out into the warm southern humidity. I walked up the long brick pathway to the heavy wooden front door. I could hear the loud sounds of a massive party echoing from the backyard patio. Laughter, the clinking of glass, and the heavy bass of rhythm and blues music drifted through the air. I did not bother knocking. I pushed the front door open and stepped into the grand foyer. The house looked exactly the same as it had 5 years ago. The massive crystal chandelier hung from the vaulted ceiling. The expensive Persian rugs covered the hardwood floors. It was a beautiful, expensive house that was currently being held together by nothing more than my signature on a corporate debt acquisition document. I walked toward the main living room where a large group of relatives had gathered. The very first person I saw was my sister Chloe. She was standing near the large stone fireplace, holding a bright circular ring light and her latest smartphone. She was wearing a stunning designer dress and actively broadcasting a live video to her followers. "Oh my gosh, you guys!" Chloe cooed into the camera, flashing her perfectly whitened teeth. "We are just having the most amazing family Sunday dinner to celebrate my father's 60th birthday. Building generational wealth and keeping the family bond strong is so incredibly important. You always have to prioritize the people who genuinely support your vision." The sheer hypocrisy of her words was almost nauseating. She was lecturing the internet about generational wealth, while her husband was actively bankrupting the entire family. Several aunts and uncles were sitting on the expensive leather sofas, nodding along and cheering for her broadcast. They were all completely intoxicated by the illusion. Then someone finally noticed me standing in the shadow of the hallway. It was Aunt Beatrice. The moment she made eye contact with me, the cheerful smile instantly vanished from her face. She stiffened, dropping her plastic cup of punch onto the coffee table. The sudden movement drew the attention of the other relatives. One by one, they turned to look at me, and the lively conversation in the room abruptly died out. Chloe lowered her ring light, noticing the sudden awkward silence. She turned around and saw me. Her eyes widened slightly, and a flash of genuine panic crossed her perfectly contoured face. She quickly tapped her phone screen, abruptly ending her live broadcast. "Charmaine," she said, her voice tight and completely lacking any sisterly warmth. "You actually came." I offered a cold, polite smile, stepping fully into the brightly lit room. "I would not miss my father's milestone birthday for the world, Chloe," I replied, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "Where are the guests of honor?" Before Chloe could answer, my mother, Elaine, emerged from the kitchen. She was carrying a massive silver platter of catered appetizers. When she saw me, she froze perfectly still. For a fraction of a second, I saw pure, unadulterated fear in her eyes. She knew I had canceled the credit cards. She knew I was angry. But she did not know the true extent of the financial devastation I had orchestrated. Elaine quickly recovered, pasting on a tight, artificial smile. She placed the heavy silver platter onto the dining table and marched directly toward me. She did not offer a hug or a kiss on the cheek. Instead, she firmly grabbed my upper arm, her beautifully manicured acrylic nails digging painfully into the expensive fabric of my suit jacket. She quickly pulled me away from the crowded living room and dragged me into the empty hallway near the downstairs guest bathroom. As soon as we were out of earshot, the fake smile melted completely off her face. "Listen to me very carefully," Charmaine Elaine hissed, her voice a harsh, aggressive whisper. "I do not know why you suddenly decided to show up here after the disgraceful way you have been acting, but you are going to behave yourself today. Your father has a lot of very important colleagues and business partners out on the patio right now. You are going to put a smile on your face. You are going to mingle nicely with the family. And you are absolutely not going to mention a single word about your little temper tantrum with the bank accounts. Do you understand me?" I looked down at her hand gripping my arm. I slowly reached up and peeled her fingers off my jacket one by one. Her grip was strong, but my resolve was made of titanium. "I am perfectly calm, Mother," I replied, brushing the invisible wrinkles from my sleeve. "I have absolutely no intention of throwing a temper tantrum. I am simply here to participate in the family legacy. I am here to discuss our shared financial future." Elaine narrowed her eyes, clearly suspicious of my calm demeanor. "Just stay out of Trey's way," she warned harshly. "He has some major investors here today, and he needs to project confidence. He does not need you glaring at him and ruining his networking opportunities." I smiled a genuine, terrifying smile. "I would never dream of ruining Trey's networking opportunities, Mother. In fact, I am very eager to see him in action." I turned my back on her and walked through the kitchen, pushing open the heavy glass doors leading out to the massive backyard patio. The Georgia heat hit me instantly, but I did not break a sweat. The backyard was packed with over 50 guests. A bartender was mixing expensive cocktails near the swimming pool, and a catering team was setting up a massive buffet of soul food and grilled meats. I scanned the crowd, instantly locking eyes with my father, Derek. Derek was standing near the outdoor bar holding a glass of dark liquor, laughing loudly at a joke someone had just told. When he saw me, his face lit up with that fake, exaggerated warmth he always used when he wanted something from me. "Charmaine, baby," he yelled, opening his arms wide and walking toward me. "You made it. My beautiful, successful daughter is finally home." He wrapped his arms around me in a tight, crushing hug. The smell of expensive cologne and strong bourbon washed over me. I stood perfectly rigid, not returning the embrace. When he pulled back, he kept his hands on my shoulders, looking at me with feigned adoration. "I am so glad you decided to come home," he said, lowering his voice so the nearby guests could not hear. "We are going to have a wonderful dinner today. We are going to fix everything." "I am sure we will fix everything, Derek." I agreed smoothly, holding my briefcase tightly against my side. "Where is Trey? I thought he was hosting important investors today." Derek's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, his eyes darting nervously toward the far corner of the patio. "Trey is just handling some last-minute business details inside," he lied smoothly. "He will join us for dinner soon. Come on, let me get you a drink. You must be exhausted from your flight." I declined the drink and stepped away from him, choosing to stand near the edge of the swimming pool to observe the crowd. The entire event was a meticulously crafted stage play, and I was the primary target. I watched the interactions quietly. Aunt Beatrice was actively avoiding making eye contact with me, hiding behind a group of church friends. Chloe was back on her phone, ignoring her husband and her child. But my eyes remained strictly focused on the large glass doors leading to my father's private study. About 20 minutes later, I saw exactly what I had been waiting for. Trey emerged from the hallway looking incredibly tense. He was wearing a custom-tailored blue suit, but he was sweating profusely. He locked eyes with Derek across the crowded patio. Trey gave a sharp, subtle nod of his head. Derek immediately excused himself from his conversation and walked briskly inside the house. Trey followed closely behind him, clutching a thick black leather binder tightly against his chest. I recognized that leather binder. It was the exact same binder Trey had brought to New York when he tried to extort $200,000 from me in the parking garage. The trap was officially being armed. They were retreating to the study to review the fraudulent loan guarantee paperwork before presenting it to me at the dinner table. They were going to wait until I was surrounded by 50 people eating their catered food to publicly pressure me into signing away my money. I took a slow, deep breath, filling my lungs with the warm southern air. The prey had confidently walked directly into the center of the kill zone. I adjusted my grip on my briefcase, turned my back to the swimming pool, and slowly followed them inside the house. It was time for dinner. I lingered in the shadowed hallway outside the heavy oak doors of my father's private study. I heard the muffled sound of papers shuffling, and Trey's nervous voice followed by Derek's low, reassuring tone. They were rehearsing their lines like amateur actors. I checked my reflection in the hallway mirror, smoothing a stray hair. Moments later, the study doors swung open. Trey stepped out first, his face flushed but his posture artificially straightened. Derek followed closely behind, patting Trey on the shoulder. When they saw me standing in the hallway, they both froze. Derek quickly recovered, his fake smile returning at full force. "Charmaine, baby," he said loudly, clapping his hands. "Perfect timing. We were just finishing up some minor administrative details. It is time to gather everyone for dinner. Why do not you go ahead and take your seat in the formal dining room?" I nodded politely, my grip tightening on my briefcase. "Of course, Derek," I replied smoothly. "Lead the way." The formal dining room was a testament to my parents' desperate need for social validation. The long mahogany table was set for 20 relatives. Crystal wine glasses sparkled under the massive chandelier, and the good silver gleamed against the expensive linen tablecloth. The catering staff had arranged a breathtaking spread of food. Massive platters of roasted turkey honey, glazed ham, baked macaroni and cheese, collard greens, and sweet potato casserole filled the air with rich, savory aromas. It looked like a magazine cover depicting the perfect wealthy family holiday. But the tension was incredibly thick. As the guests filtered in, everyone scrambled to find designated seats. Chloe and Trey were seated directly to my father's right hand, the undisputed position of honor. My mother sat at the opposite end of the long table, playing the perfect hostess. I was directed to sit near the middle, flanked by Aunt Beatrice and my cousin Darius. Darius was the one who left me that venomous voicemail earlier in the week demanding an apology. Now sitting next to me, he found his shoes incredibly fascinating, refusing to make eye contact. Aunt Beatrice looked like she was sitting on hot coals. She rigidly kept her hands in her lap, staring blankly at her empty plate. She knew the truth about the medical bills. She knew Chloe was a liar, and she knew I held the actual receipts. Every time Chloe laughed loudly from the head of the table, Beatrice visibly flinched. The proud matriarch had been silenced by her own guilt and shame. Derek picked up his water glass and tapped his spoon against the rim, calling for attention. The room quickly quieted down. Before we partake in this feast, Derek announced, his voice booming with forced joviality. "I want to say a few words of grace. Let us bow our heads." Everyone around the table dutifully bowed their heads and closed their eyes. I kept my eyes wide open, staring directly at Trey, who was peeking at me from across the table. "Heavenly Father," Derek began, his tone adopting a reverent cadence, "we thank you for this bountiful food and for the blessings you continue to shower upon this family. We thank you for health, for prosperity, and for the strength of our bloodline. We ask that you continue to guide our businesses and protect our legacy. And we especially thank you for bringing Charmaine back to our table today so that we may be completely whole once again. Amen." A chorus of amens echoed around the mahogany table. The polite clinking of silverware against expensive china began. My mother started directing the catering staff to pour the wine, while Chloe immediately began dominating the conversation. She loudly recounted a fabricated story about a cosmetics brand flying her out to Los Angeles for an exclusive photo shoot. The relatives eagerly ate up her lies, validating her false reality. No one asked me a single question about my life in New York. I was treated like a silent, wealthy ghost invited only to eventually foot the bill. I ate my food methodically, savoring the seasoned chicken while watching the psychological games unfold. Trey was drinking heavily, downing 2 glasses of expensive bourbon in rapid succession. His earlier confidence was wavering under the immense pressure of his impending financial doom. He kept throwing nervous glances at my leather briefcase placed deliberately on the floor next to my chair. He knew what was coming, but he banked his entire future on the hope that I would submit to the family pressure. As the main course was being cleared away, Chloe stood up from her chair. She smoothed down her designer dress and raised her crystal champagne flute. The room instantly fell silent, giving the golden child their undivided attention. "I just want to make a quick toast," Chloe said, her voice taking on that sickly sweet tone she used for her videos. She looked down at Derek, smiling warmly. "Happy 60th birthday, Dad. You and Mom have built such an incredible life for us. You taught us the true meaning of hard work." Chloe paused, letting her gaze sweep across the table until her eyes locked directly onto mine. Her smile sharpened, turning into a subtle weapon. "Some people out there think that money is the only thing that matters," she continued, her voice laced with heavy implication. "Some people think that having a fancy job or a big bank account makes you superior. But Trey and I know the real truth. We know that real wealth is family. Real wealth is being there for each other through thick and thin and never turning your back on blood." The relatives murmured their enthusiastic agreement, raising their glasses in the air. "Cheers to family," they echoed, blindly oblivious to the hypocrisy of the statement. Chloe took a delicate sip of her champagne and sat back down, looking pleased with her passive-aggressive performance. She had successfully painted herself as the moral center of the family while silently branding me as the greedy outsider. It was a masterful stroke of manipulation designed to soften me up for the final blow. Right on cue, Derek stood up to address the table. He buttoned his suit jacket, puffing out his chest with manufactured pride. "Thank you, my beautiful Chloe," he said, wiping a fake tear from his eye. "That means the world to me. And speaking of family and the future, I actually have a very important announcement to make tonight. Since I have reached this milestone age, I have been thinking a lot about the legacy of the Washington family." The room grew entirely still. Even the catering staff stopped moving. I leaned back slightly in my chair, crossing my legs and waiting for the punchline. I want to make sure that the wealth and stability I have built over the past 40 years is securely passed down to the next generation, Derek proclaimed loudly in the grand room. I want to ensure that my grandson has a solid foundation when he grows up. Therefore, I have officially decided to put this entire house and the surrounding property into an irrevocable family trust in his name. A collective gasp of admiration rippled around the dining table. Several aunts clapped their hands together, praising Derek's generosity and forward thinking. Chloe covered her mouth, feigning absolute shock and gratitude. "Oh my God, Dad!" she squealed, reaching out to grab his hand. "That is the most amazing gift." Trey forced a wide grin, nodding his head enthusiastically, as if he had not just spent the last 20 minutes orchestrating this exact announcement. But Derek was not finished. He held up a hand, asking for quiet. Now, in order to finalize the trust and secure some minor administrative details regarding the estate, we need to make sure all our current business ventures are perfectly aligned. He looked down at Trey, giving him the final signal. Trey cleared his throat, sitting up extremely straight in his chair. He reached under the table and pulled out the thick black leather binder. He slid the heavy binder across the polished mahogany wood. It stopped exactly in front of my plate. The dark leather contrasted sharply with the white linen tablecloth. Every single pair of eyes in the room slowly shifted from Trey to me. The heavy silence felt like a physical weight pressing down on my shoulders. "Charmaine," Trey said, his voice dripping with fake humility. "As you know, my real estate firm is expanding rapidly. We are on the verge of closing a massive commercial deal that will secure the family legacy for decades to come." He gestured toward the black binder. "But we hit a tiny administrative snag with the primary lender. Because Dad is restructuring his assets to create the trust for my son, the bank just needs a simple secondary guarantor to sign off on a minor business loan restructure. It is just a formality, really." Elaine silently demanded my signature. She leaned forward, her elbows resting heavily on the white linen tablecloth. "Sign the document, Charmaine," she commanded, her voice carrying a sharp edge of maternal authority that she incorrectly assumed still held power over me. "It is the absolute least you can do after the disgraceful way you treated this family last month. We covered up your little temper tantrum with the credit cards to save you from public embarrassment, but it is time for you to be a team player. Your father is trying to build a legacy, and your brother-in-law is offering you a chance to be a part of it." The heavy silence in the dining room stretched tightly. Every single relative was watching me closely. Cousin Darius shifted uncomfortably in his seat next to me, letting out a quiet sigh of deep disapproval. Uncle George, sitting right across the table, crossed his arms over his chest, shaking his head as if my hesitation was a personal insult to the entire bloodline. They were all participating in this coordinated ambush. They genuinely believed that the intense peer pressure of a crowded Sunday dinner would force me to blindly sign a financial contract just to keep the peace. I slowly lowered my gaze to the thick black leather binder resting on the table. A high-quality silver pen was tucked neatly under the flap. I did not reach for the pen. I did not even lean forward to read the visible text on the top page. I already knew exactly what those papers were. They were not a minor administrative update. They were an emergency guarantor agreement designed to transfer the full liability of Trey's massive defaulted commercial loan directly onto my personal wealth portfolio. He wanted me to unknowingly legally absorb his $1.2 million debt, so the bank would release the lien on my parents' house. Trey cleared his throat, his nervous sweat reflecting the warm glow of the crystal chandelier overhead. "Come on, Charmaine," he urged, trying to sound like a confident chief executive officer. "It is just a standard boilerplate contract. I would not even bother you with it, but the bank is being incredibly rigid about the trust transfer. If you just sign on the dotted line, we can put all this boring business talk away and get back to celebrating your father's 60th birthday." Chloe is dying to cut the cake. I slowly reached out, but I did not touch the silver pen. Instead, I picked up my crystal water glass. I took a very slow, deliberate sip, the ice clinking softly against the glass. The sound echoed loudly in the tense room. I placed the glass back onto the table, aligning it perfectly with my plate. I looked directly into Trey's desperate, sweating face. I'm not signing anything, Trey, I said, my voice perfectly calm and entirely devoid of emotion. A collective gasp rippled around the mahogany table. The polite facade of the family gathering instantly shattered. Trey's jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscles jumping in his cheek. Derek slammed his open palm down on the table, rattling the expensive silverware. Now you listen to me. Charmaine. Derek barked, his face turning a deep shade of red. You are not going to sit at my dining table, eat my food, and disrespect this family. Your brother-in-law is running a highly successful real estate development firm. He is bringing massive wealth into this household. He asked you for a simple signature to help secure your own nephew's financial future. You are being incredibly selfish and bitter. Elaine quickly chimed in, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. You have always been like this, Charmaine. Ever since you were a little girl, you could never just be happy for your sister. You always had to ruin every special moment because you were jealous. Chloe finally found a wonderful husband who provides for her, and now you want to sabotage their success because you are sitting up in New York all alone. The surrounding relatives began murmuring their loud agreement. Disgraceful, one aunt whispered loudly. She has all that corporate money, and she will not even help her own blood cousin, Darius added, shaking his head in disgust. The pressure cooker was officially whistling. They were trying to break my spirit using the exact same psychological tactics they had used throughout my entire childhood. They wanted me to feel small, isolated, and desperate for their approval. But I was not that frightened little girl in the pale blue bedroom anymore. I was an apex predator, and I was currently holding the absolute legal right to destroy their entire reality. I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch under their collective glare. I simply turned my attention away from Trey and focused my cold stare directly on my father. Derek, I said, slicing through the chaotic murmurs with the sheer icy authority in my tone. You cannot put this house into a family trust for your grandson. Derek scoffed loudly, waving his hand in the air. Oh, really? He mocked, glaring at me. And why is that, Charmaine? Are you going to call your fancy Wall Street lawyers and try to sue me for a piece of the inheritance? Because let me tell you right now, you are not getting a single dime of this estate. Everything I own is going to Chloe and her boy. You made your choice when you canceled those credit cards. I smiled, a slow, terrifying smile that made the confident mockery die instantly in his throat. I am not looking for an inheritance, Derek, I replied smoothly. I am stating a legal fact. You cannot put this property into an irrevocable trust. Before Derek could even process my words, Chloe exploded. She pushed her chair back violently, the wooden legs screeching loudly against the polished hardwood floor. She stood up, her face contorted with pure, unadulterated rage. Her perfectly crafted influencer persona completely vanished, replaced by the vicious, spoiled golden child I had known my entire life. Are you seriously this pathetic, Charmaine? Chloe screamed, pointing a shaking finger at my face. Are you actually this incredibly jealous of my beautiful life? You cannot stand the fact that Dad is giving the family home to my son. You cannot stand the fact that Trey is a successful businessman, while you are just a lonely, miserable workaholic who has to buy friends. She slammed both of her hands down onto the mahogany table, leaning aggressively toward me. This is my father's house, Chloe declared, her voice echoing into the adjoining rooms, causing the guests on the patio to fall silent. He worked his entire life to buy this beautiful home. He pays the mortgage. He pays the taxes. He can do whatever he wants with his property. He wants to give it to my family because we actually love him. We actually show up for him. You do not get to come down here after 5 years of ignoring us and dictate what my father does with his own assets. Elaine nodded vigorously, dabbing her dry eyes with a linen napkin. Tell her, Chloe, Elaine encouraged loudly. Tell her the absolute truth. You are nothing but a bitter, toxic outsider. Chloe continued, her voice dripping with venom. You think your money gives you power over us. You think because you work in a tall glass building, you can look down on us. But you have absolutely no power here, Charmaine. You are sitting in our house. You are sitting at our table. And if you do not want to sign that paper and support this family, then you can pack your bags and walk right out that front door. We do not need you. We never really needed you. We only tolerated you out of pity. The silence that followed her vicious outburst was completely deafening. The entire dining room waited with bated breath to see if I would finally break down. Aunt Beatrice squeezed her eyes shut, refusing to watch the execution. Trey stood behind Chloe looking smug, believing his wife had successfully bullied me into absolute submission. Derek and Elaine watched me with cold, triumphant expressions. They had played their ultimate hand. I uncrossed my legs and sat up perfectly straight. I reached down and picked up my leather briefcase from the floor, placing it onto my lap. "You are right about one thing, Chloe," I said, my voice dangerously soft, forcing everyone in the room to lean in. "Money does not grant you power over people, but legal ownership absolutely does." I popped the brass latches, pulling out a crisp document. I placed it flat on the table. "He cannot put the house in a trust, Chloe," I said, my voice slicing through the thick tension of the room like a surgical scalpel, "because he does not own it." The absolute silence that followed my statement was heavy enough to crush bone. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved a single muscle. Derek stared at me, his mouth hanging slightly open as if his brain completely failed to process the English language. Chloe let out a sharp, confused laugh, looking around the table to see if anyone else understood the joke. "What are you even talking about?" Chloe scoffed, her voice trembling slightly. "Of course Dad owns the house. His name is on the mailbox. He pays the bills." I kept my eyes locked directly on my father. "Tell her, Derek," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Tell your perfect golden child the absolute truth about what happened 5 years ago when your contracting business went under. Tell her about the mountain of undisclosed debt you accumulated trying to maintain this fake country club lifestyle." Derek swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. His face, which had been bright red with anger just moments ago, rapidly drained of all color, turning a sickly ashen gray. "Charmaine, please," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Not now, not in front of everyone." But I was not going to protect his fragile ego any longer. I reached into my leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents stamped with official county seals. I tossed the heavy stack directly into the center of the mahogany table, right next to the massive platter of roasted turkey. The papers fanned out across the white linen tablecloth, exposing the bold black text. "5 years ago, Derek called me in the middle of the night crying," I announced to the entire dining room, making sure my voice carried to the aunts and uncles sitting at the far ends of the table. "He was 2 weeks away from a bank foreclosure. He had secretly remortgaged this house twice to pay for Chloe's lavish wedding to Trey. He was completely bankrupt. He begged me for a massive cash bailout to save the family home." Elaine covered her face with her hands, letting out a quiet, muffled sob. Aunt Beatrice gasped loudly, clutching her chest. "But I am not a foolish investor." I continued, resting my hands on the edge of the table. "I did not just hand over hundreds of thousands of dollars to a man who refuses to live within his means. I did not give him a loan. I bought the debt entirely. I paid off the bank and transferred the deed of this property into a private holding company, an LLC, that I personally own and control." "No," Derek stammered weakly, grabbing the edge of the table. "We signed ownership papers. The lawyer said we were still the owners on paper." I shook my head slowly, pitying his deliberate ignorance. "You signed a residential lease agreement, Derek. You are listed as tenants. I drafted a specialized lease that allowed you and Mother to live here with a $0 monthly rent requirement. I paid the property taxes. I paid the homeowner's insurance. I paid the maintenance fees. You have been living in my house completely rent-free for 5 years, playing the role of the wealthy patriarch while I silently funded your absolute delusion." The relatives around the table began whispering frantically to each other. Uncle George looked at Derek with pure disgust, realizing that his brother had been lying to the entire family for years about his financial success. Cousin Darius looked down at his plate, his face burning with intense embarrassment for having defended them. The illusion of black excellence that my parents had so desperately tried to project had just been violently shattered in front of their closest friends and family members. Chloe grabbed the documents from the center of the table, her perfectly manicured nails frantically tearing through the pages. She scanned the legal jargon, her eyes darting back and forth in absolute panic. "This is fake," she shrieked, throwing the papers back onto the table. "This has to be fake. You forged this, Charmaine. Dad would never sign the house over to you." It is public record, Chloe, I replied smoothly. You can look it up on the county property appraiser website right now on that expensive smartphone I bought for you. You have spent your entire life bragging about your generational wealth. You built your entire social media following by pretending you came from old money. But the absolute truth is that your generational wealth does not exist. It is a complete fabrication. Your inheritance is exactly zero. Chloe let out a devastated sob, sinking back into her chair. The golden child had just been officially stripped of her crown. The kingdom she thought she was inheriting was entirely owned by the sister she had relentlessly bullied and alienated. Your lavish influencer lifestyle was never funded by your own success. I continued turning the knife with surgical precision. It was funded by the 3 platinum credit cards I authorized for this family. The same credit cards I permanently canceled last month. That is why you have not posted a single shopping haul video in 4 weeks. You are completely broke, Chloe. You do not own this house and you do not have any money. I then slowly turned my gaze away from my sobbing sister and focused entirely on the man sitting next to her. Trey had been sitting completely frozen since I dropped the deed onto the table. He was sweating so profusely that his custom blue suit collar was entirely soaked. He realized that the trap he had so carefully laid for me had just closed violently around his own neck. "And then there is you, Trey," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. The brilliant chief executive officer, the mastermind who thought he could use a crowded family dinner to extort his sister-in-law. Trey swallowed heavily, refusing to look me in the eye. He stared at his water glass, breathing rapidly. "You handed me a contract tonight," I continued, tapping the thick black leather binder he had slid across the table earlier. "You tried to publicly shame me into signing a guarantor agreement for your business loan. You told the entire family that it was a simple formality to secure a trust for your son. But we both know that was a massive lie. Do we not, Trey?" He remained completely silent, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. "Tell them, Trey," I commanded, my voice echoing loudly in the quiet room. "Tell your loving wife and your adoring parents-in-law exactly why you needed my signature tonight. Tell them what you secretly used as collateral to secure your failing commercial loan." Trey shook his head slightly, his eyes wide with absolute panic. "Shut up, Charmaine," he hissed under his breath. "Do not do this." "If you will not tell them, I will," I announced, standing up from my chair to command the absolute attention of everyone in the room. 6 months ago, Trey took out a massive, high-risk commercial loan to save his bankrupt real estate company, but he did not have any assets to use as collateral. So he convinced Derek and Elaine to co-sign the loan. He secretly leveraged their entire retirement fund and placed a secondary lien on this exact house. Elaine let out a piercing scream. She grabbed Derek's arm, shaking him violently. "Tell me she is lying, Derek," she sobbed hysterically. "Tell me you did not gamble our retirement money on Trey's business." Derek could not even look at her. He buried his face in his hands, weeping openly in front of the entire family. His silence was the ultimate confession. Chloe turned to Trey, her face contorted with horror and betrayal. "You put a lien on my parents' house," she screamed, hitting him on the shoulder. "You told me the business was generating millions. You told me we were rich." "Your husband is a fraud, Chloe," I stated coldly. "He has been running a Ponzi scheme for a year, and the commercial loan he took out is currently in total default. The bank was preparing to execute the lien and seize this property. They were going to kick Derek and Elaine out onto the street. That is the only reason they suddenly decided to invite me to this Sunday dinner. They knew they were facing imminent homelessness, and they needed me to blindly absorb Trey's $1 million debt to save their own skin." The dining room erupted into absolute chaos. Aunt Beatrice stood up, pointing an accusing finger at Trey, calling him a wicked, deceitful man. Uncle George yelled at Derek for being a reckless fool. Chloe continued to scream at Trey, hitting his chest while he desperately tried to push her away. Elaine was hyperventilating, clutching her chest, as if she were having a heart attack. The perfect family dinner had devolved into a spectacular display of destruction and betrayal. I stood there watching the absolute carnage unfold. I did not feel a single ounce of pity for any of them. They had dug this grave with their own greed and arrogance. I had simply arrived to push them all inside. "But the bank is not going to take the house!" Trey suddenly yelled, standing up and slamming his fist down onto the table to silence the screaming relatives. He pointed a shaking finger directly at me, his face twisted with desperate fury. "She is lying. The bank is not going to foreclose because she bought the debt. She told me in the parking garage last week. Her holding company bought my commercial loan. She is my creditor." Trey let out a harsh, manic laugh, looking around the table at the shocked relatives. "Do not you all see what she is doing?" he shouted desperately, trying to turn the family against me one last time. "She set this entire thing up. She bought my debt on purpose just so she could hold it over our heads. She wants to control us. She wants to ruin my business and steal the house. She is a malicious, vindictive bitch." Trey took a threatening step toward me, the veins popping violently in his thick neck. "You think you are so smart, Charmaine?" He spat, his voice dripping with pure hatred. "You think you can just march in here and destroy my life? I will sue you. I will hire the best corporate lawyers in the state of Georgia. My company will drag your precious investment fund through the mud. I will tie you up in litigation for the next 10 years until you are begging to settle. I will destroy you." I looked at his red, sweating face. I looked at his desperate, empty threats. I looked at the man who had tried to steal my money, manipulate my family, and extort me in a dark parking garage. And I did something that absolutely terrified him. I threw my head back and I laughed. It was not a quiet, polite chuckle. It was a loud, genuine, echoing laugh that sliced cleanly through the chaotic screaming of the dining room. I laughed until my chest ached. I laughed at the sheer, pathetic absurdity of his empty threats. The sound of my laughter completely silenced the room once again. Even Chloe stopped sobbing to stare at me as if I had completely lost my mind. I slowly stopped laughing, wiping a single tear of pure amusement from my eye. I picked up my leather briefcase and snapped the brass latches shut. "You are going to sue me, Trey?" I asked, my voice dripping with absolute mockery. "With what money? You do not have a single dime to your name. You cannot even afford the lease payment on the car parked in the driveway. You are completely insolvent." I leaned across the mahogany table, resting my hands flat against the polished wood. "You do not have a company anymore, Trey. I own your assets. I own your commercial properties. I own the camera equipment your wife uses to film her fake life. I am your majority creditor and your corporate executioner. I do not just hold your debt. I hold your entire future." I stood up straight, adjusting my tailored emerald suit jacket. "And as for this house," I announced, my voice ringing with finality, "the $0 lease agreement is officially terminated due to fraudulent activity by the tenants." I pulled 3 thick white envelopes from the side pocket of my briefcase and tossed them onto the table. They landed perfectly next to the cold, untouched dinner plates. "Those are your 30-day eviction notices," I stated coldly. "You have exactly 1 month to pack your belongings and vacate my property. Have a wonderful birthday, Derek." The room remained completely paralyzed. Nobody dared to speak as I turned my back on the massive dining table. I walked slowly and deliberately out of the formal dining room, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. I did not look back at my weeping mother, my broken father, or my humiliated sister. I walked out the front door into the warm Georgia night, breathing the fresh, clean air. The suffocating weight of my childhood was finally gone, leaving behind only the cold, satisfying reality of absolute victory. The dining room felt as though all the oxygen had been instantly sucked out through the air conditioning vents. The polite clinking of expensive silverware stopped completely. Even the ice melting in the crystal water glasses seemed to freeze in place. Chloe stared at me with her mouth slightly open, her perfectly glossed lips trembling, as her brain violently rejected the words I had just spoken. Derek gripped the heavy edge of the mahogany table, his knuckles turning stark white against his dark skin. "What kind of sick joke is this?" Charmaine Derek demanded, his voice wavering precariously between manufactured rage and genuine rising panic. You are not going to sit at my table and disrespect me in front of our family. This is my house. I built this legacy from the ground up. I did not blink. I did not break eye contact with the man who had spent my entire life making me feel like a disposable asset. I reached down to the floor and picked up my expensive leather briefcase, placing it squarely onto my lap. The sharp click of the brass latches echoing in the dead silent room sounded like a rifle cocking. I reached inside and pulled out a thick stack of official legal documents bound by a heavy blue legal cover. It was the original notarized property deed, complete with the raised embossed seal of the county clerk. I held the heavy stack of papers in my hand for a brief second, letting the anticipation suffocate the room. Then I tossed it directly onto the center of the table. The heavy document landed with a loud smack right in the middle of the lavish feast. One corner dipped directly into the silver serving tray of baked macaroni and cheese, while the other edge rested against the crystal bowl of collard greens. Nobody moved to save the papers from the food. They all just stared at the bold black lettering on the front page. 5 years ago, when your contracting business completely collapsed, and you were 2 weeks away from a bank foreclosure, you called me begging for a bailout, I said, my voice echoing cleanly across the long table. You cried on the phone, Derek. You begged me to save you from the ultimate humiliation of losing the family home. So I stepped in and I handled the situation like the senior corporate executive that I am. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the edge of the table. But I am not a charity and I do not make foolish investments. I did not just give you hundreds of thousands of dollars to save your house. I bought it. I paid off the bank in full and I transferred the property deed into a private holding company, a limited liability company that belongs entirely to me. I am the sole proprietor of the estate we are currently sitting in. The shockwave that ripped through the dining room was visceral. My mother Elaine let out a sharp, strangled gasp, raising both hands to cover her mouth. All the color drained instantly from her face, leaving her looking pale and suddenly very old. Uncle George, who had been nodding along with Derek's legacy speech just moments earlier, dropped his linen napkin onto his plate, his eyes wide with absolute disbelief. Cousin Darius shifted his dining chair backward as if trying to physically distance himself from the blast radius. The perfectly crafted facade of black excellence that my parents had meticulously built and desperately maintained for decades was completely incinerated in a matter of seconds. That is a lie. Derek stammered loudly, standing up so fast his heavy chair wobbled behind him. His chest was heaving, his eyes darting frantically around the room as he realized his closest friends and family were watching his empire crumble in real time. We signed ownership papers in the lawyer's office. We are the owners on paper, Charmaine. You said it was a joint trust to protect the asset. I shook my head slowly, feeling a deep, profound sense of pity mixed with utter disgust. You did not read the paperwork, Derek. You were so blinded by panic and pride that you just signed wherever my corporate lawyer placed a yellow sticky note. You are not listed as the owners. You are listed as residential tenants. I drafted a specialized lease agreement that allowed you and Mother to live here with a $0 monthly rent requirement. I paid the annual property taxes. I paid the expensive homeowners insurance premiums. I paid for the landscaping and the pool maintenance. You have been living in my property completely rent-free for 5 years, playing the role of the wealthy patriarch, while I silently funded your absolute delusion. And the most important clause in that lease agreement is the termination clause. It is a month-to-month agreement that I hold the absolute legal right to terminate at any time for any reason whatsoever. Derek's legs seemed to give out beneath him. He sank slowly back into his heavy dining chair, staring blankly at the ruined deed resting in the macaroni and cheese. The absolute patriarch of the Washington family had been reduced to a charity case, living entirely at the mercy of the daughter he had always treated with blatant contempt. With Derek completely neutralized, I slowly turned my gaze down the table toward the golden child. Chloe was hyperventilating. Her chest was rising and falling rapidly, her perfectly manicured nails digging fiercely into the white linen tablecloth. The smug, victorious smirk she had worn while giving her toast had been entirely wiped away. "So, Chloe," I said, my voice dripping with cold, calculated mockery, "tell me more about your generational wealth. Tell me more about this beautiful inheritance you were so excited to receive today." Because as far as I can tell, your generational wealth is entirely fake. It is a complete fabrication designed to make you feel superior to everyone else in this room. Shut up, Chloe whispered, tears finally spilling over her dark eyelashes and ruining her expensive makeup. Stop talking to me. But I was not going to stop. I had 30 years of suppressed anger fueling my words, and I was going to deliver every single ounce of it. You built your entire internet persona around being a wealthy, affluent lifestyle influencer. I continued ensuring my voice reached every corner of the dining room. You post videos bragging about your luxury shopping sprees and your exclusive spa days. But your lifestyle is just as fake as your inheritance. You have not booked a paying brand sponsorship in over 2 years. Your designer clothes, your fancy brunches, and your luxurious vacations were all funded by the 3 platinum credit cards I authorized for this family. The exact same credit cards I permanently canceled last Sunday. Aunt Beatrice let out a loud, disappointed sigh, shaking her head as she looked at Chloe. The other relatives began whispering among themselves, the sound resembling a swarm of angry bees. They were realizing that the golden child they had idolized and praised for years was nothing more than a heavily subsidized fraud who stole credit for paying medical bills. You are completely broke, Chloe, I stated plainly, delivering the final crushing blow to her fragile ego. You do not own this house. You do not have a successful business. You do not have a single dime to your name. You are a 35-year-old woman playing dress-up with your estranged sister's money. And now the Bank of Charmaine is permanently closed. Chloe buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The sound of her crying was loud and desperate, but nobody rushed to comfort her. Elaine was too paralyzed by her own shock to move, and Derek was staring vacantly at the wall. The relatives who usually rushed to coddle the golden child remained firmly in their seats, entirely repulsed by the staggering magnitude of her lies. I let her cry for a few seconds, allowing the humiliation to fully saturate the room. Then I shifted my attention to the final remaining target, the man who had orchestrated this entire disastrous Sunday dinner in a desperate attempt to save his own skin. I turned my gaze across the table, locking eyes with my brother-in-law. "And what about you, Trey?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous, hushed tone. "Are you ready to tell the family why you really needed my signature on that guarantor document today?" Trey was gripping the edge of the mahogany table so tightly I thought the wood might actually splinter. His custom-tailored blue suit was completely drenched in nervous sweat, sticking uncomfortably to his broad shoulders. He looked like a trapped animal desperately searching for an exit that did not exist. The alpha male facade he wore like a suit of armor had completely melted away, leaving behind a terrified, incompetent fraud. "Do not do this," Charmaine Trey hissed through clenched teeth, his eyes darting toward the relatives who were now staring at him with intense suspicion. "Keep business out of this. This is a family dinner." "You brought the business to the dinner table, Trey," I reminded him, gesturing toward the thick black leather binder he had slid across the table earlier. "You tried to publicly ambush me. You tried to use peer pressure and family guilt to trick me into legally absorbing your massive corporate debt. You thought I would be too intimidated by the crowd to read the fine print. But you severely underestimated who you were dealing with." I stood up slowly from my chair, commanding the absolute attention of everyone in the dining room. I smoothed the lapels of my emerald green suit jacket, looking down at the sweating, desperate man across from me. "Your real estate development firm is entirely insolvent," I announced loudly. "You defaulted on a $1.2 million commercial loan. You have been running a miniature Ponzi scheme for 12 months using new investor capital to cover the interest payments on your toxic debt. You are a catastrophic failure as a chief executive officer." Trey jumped up from his chair, knocking his crystal wine glass over. The dark red liquid spilled across the white tablecloth, looking entirely like fresh blood. "Shut your mouth!" he roared, his face contorting into an ugly mask of pure aggressive rage. The thick veins in his neck popped out visibly, straining against his skin. "You do not know anything about my company. You are just a bitter, vindictive woman trying to tear down a successful black man because you cannot find a husband of your own." I remained perfectly still, completely unbothered by his aggressive posturing. "I know everything about your company, Trey. I replied, my voice sharp and unwavering. Because I am the one who bought your defaulted commercial loan. My holding company holds the primary lien on your entire business. I own your assets. I own your leased vehicles. I am your majority creditor. The revelation hit Trey like a physical blow to the chest. He staggered back slightly, his eyes wide with sheer terror as the reality of his situation finally crushed him. He had tried to extort the exact person who currently held his entire financial future in the palm of her hand. "You malicious bitch," Trey screamed, spitting the words across the table as he completely lost the last shred of his sanity. "I will sue you. I will hire the most aggressive corporate litigators in the state of Georgia. My company will drag your precious investment fund through the mud. I will tie you up in court for the next 10 years until you are completely bankrupt. I will destroy everything you have ever built." He stood there, chest heaving, breathing heavily, as he waited for me to show a single ounce of fear or intimidation. He waited for me to back down under the weight of his aggressive threats. He expected me to negotiate or apologize for exposing him in front of the family. Instead, I looked at his red, sweating face. I looked at his ruined suit and his desperate, empty threats. And then I did the only thing a true apex predator could do when confronted by a cornered rat. I threw my head back and I laughed. The sound of my laughter echoed sharply against the high vaulted ceiling of the dining room. It was not a polite or restrained sound. It was the deep, visceral laughter of a woman who had completely outmaneuvered her enemy. Trey stood there with his fists clenched, his chest heaving, but he did not take another step toward me. My complete lack of fear paralyzed him. He was so accustomed to bullying his way through life using his physical presence and his loud voice to intimidate people. But you cannot intimidate someone who holds the keys to your financial prison. I let the laughter fade away, wiping a tear of pure amusement from the corner of my eye. "Sue me," I repeated, letting the words roll around the quiet room. "You are going to hire the most aggressive corporate litigators in Georgia to sue me. That is a fascinating strategy, Trey. But there is a very significant flaw in your brilliant legal plan. Corporate litigators require massive retainers. They require liquid cash. And you do not even have enough money in your checking account to buy a value meal at a fast food drive-thru." I reached down into my leather briefcase one more time. My fingers brushed past the eviction notices and closed around a second, much thicker folder. I pulled it out and dropped it onto the table right next to the ruined property deed. This folder was black-stamped with the gold foil logo of my New York investment fund. "You told the family that your business was booming," I said, my voice returning to that cold, surgical precision. "You told them you were expanding, but these are the corporate acquisition papers. These are the certified documents detailing the absolute collapse of your real estate firm. You defaulted on a $1.2 million commercial loan. You missed 7 consecutive payments. The bank sent you 4 separate notices of default, which you deliberately ignored and hid from your wife and your in-laws. The bank considered your portfolio to be a highly toxic asset, so they sold your debt for pennies on the dollar." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the edge of the mahogany table. I locked eyes with him, refusing to let him look away. "My fund bought your debt," I stated clearly, articulating every single syllable. "I am your majority creditor. I own your company, Trey. I own every single piece of heavy machinery sitting on your abandoned construction sites. I own the laptops sitting on the desks in your leased office space. I own the Range Rover currently parked in my driveway. I even own the high-definition digital camera that Chloe uses to film her fake life because you purchased it using a business credit card that is now fully under my control. You are entirely stripped of everything you claim to possess." Trey stared at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot. The aggressive alpha male mask completely shattered, falling away to reveal a terrified, desperate fraud. His legs gave out beneath him. He collapsed backward heavily into his dining chair, the wood groaning under his dead weight. He buried his face in his large hands, letting out a pathetic whimpering sound that was entirely devoid of any masculine pride. The illusion he had spent years meticulously constructing was instantly pulverized in front of the entire family. Chloe had been sitting in stunned silence, processing the horrifying reality of her situation. When Trey collapsed into his chair, the shock finally wore off, and the pure, unadulterated rage set in. She turned her body toward him, her face contorted into a mask of absolute fury. "What is she talking about?" Chloe screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. She grabbed Trey's arm and violently yanked his hands away from his face. "Look at me, Trey. Tell me she is lying. You told me the business was generating millions. You told me we were about to buy a vacation home in Miami." Trey could not even look at her. He stared blankly at his empty dinner plate, his shoulders slumped in utter defeat. "The market shifted," he mumbled weakly, offering a pathetic excuse. "The supply chain issues ruined my profit margins. I was trying to fix it, Chloe. I just needed a little more time. I was going to secure new investors and pay the bank back." "You liar!" Chloe shrieked, standing up and slapping him hard across the shoulder. The sharp sound of her hand hitting his suit jacket echoed loudly in the room. "You absolute failure! You told me we were rich. You made me look like a fool on the internet. I bragged to all my friends about how successful you were. I defended you to this entire family, and you were secretly bankrupting us. You put a lien on my parents' house. You gambled away my inheritance." Trey suddenly snapped, his own humiliation boiling over into defensive anger. He jumped to his feet, knocking his chair over backward. "Do not you dare put this all on me," he roared, pointing a shaking finger directly at Chloe's face. "You are just as responsible for this mess as I am. You spent money faster than I could steal it. You demanded designer bags, expensive vacations, and a massive wedding just to impress a bunch of strangers on the internet. You refused to get a real job. You drained my accounts dry to fund your pathetic influencer lifestyle. You are nothing but a greedy, selfish gold digger who only loved me when my credit cards were working." Chloe gasped, clutching her chest as if she had been physically stabbed. "How dare you!" she screamed, tears streaming down her face. "I gave you a child. I gave you the best years of my life." The two of them stood there screaming vicious insults at each other, entirely forgetting about the audience surrounding them. The beautiful, successful golden couple had devolved into two desperate, cornered animals, tearing each other to pieces. Cousin Darius looked away, visibly disgusted by their behavior. Uncle George shook his head slowly, muttering under his breath about the shame they had brought upon the family name. The relatives who had spent years admiring and envying Chloe and Trey were now looking at them with a mixture of profound pity and absolute contempt. I stood there watching the carnage unfold with a completely blank expression. I had anticipated this exact reaction. When you build a marriage entirely on a foundation of money and lies, the slightest tremor of truth will cause the entire structure to collapse. They were destroying each other, and I did not have to lift a single finger to help them do it. But my mother Elaine could not handle the destruction of her perfect family image. She had spent decades cultivating this exact scenario, manipulating everyone around her to maintain the illusion of superiority. Seeing her favorite daughter publicly humiliated and her son-in-law exposed as a massive fraud was too much for her fragile ego to bear. Elaine stood up from her chair, her hands trembling violently. She walked quickly around the table, stepping carefully over the spilled wine and the ruined legal documents. She came to stand directly in front of me, her face pale and streaked with fresh tears. "Charmaine, please!" Elaine pleaded, her voice thick with desperation. She reached out and grabbed my hands, holding them tightly against her chest. Her grip was frantic, searching for any trace of the desperate little girl she used to control. "Please stop this. Please, look at what is happening to your sister. Look at what you are doing to this family. You have made your point. You have proven how powerful you are, but you have to stop now." I looked down at her hands gripping mine. Her skin was cold and clammy. I did not pull away, but I did not return the gesture. "What exactly am I doing to this family, Mother?" I asked, my voice perfectly even. "I am simply presenting the truth. I am presenting certified legal documents. The truth is what is destroying this family, not me." "But he is family," Elaine cried, ignoring my logic completely. She pointed a shaking finger back toward Trey, who was currently ignoring Chloe to stare miserably at the floor. "Trey made a terrible mistake. He was foolish and greedy, but he is still the father of your nephew. He is still part of this family. You cannot just take his company and throw him out onto the street. And you certainly cannot evict your own parents from their home. She squeezed my hands tighter, looking up at me with wide, pleading eyes. She was playing the ultimate trump card. She was weaponizing her role as my mother, desperately trying to invoke a sense of filial duty that she had never earned. "We are your parents," Charmaine Elaine sobbed, her voice cracking perfectly on cue. "We raised you. We sacrificed for you. We love you." We had absolutely no idea that Trey was doing any of this. We did not know he was bankrupt. We did not know he was trying to steal your money tonight. We were completely blind to his manipulation. "You have to believe us. You cannot punish us for his crimes." I stared into my mother's eyes. For a fraction of a second, I saw a flicker of hope behind her tears. She genuinely believed she was breaking through my defenses. She thought her maternal tears and her desperate pleas were softening my resolve. She thought the obedient daughter was finally going to surface and forgive everything just to receive a scrap of affection. I slowly pulled my hands out of her grasp. I reached into the pocket of my emerald green suit jacket and pulled out my smartphone. I tapped the screen, waking it up. The bright light illuminated my face, reflecting in my cold, unblinking eyes. "You had no idea," I repeated softly, tilting my head slightly to the side. "You were completely blind to his manipulation. You were just innocent victims in all of this." "Yes," Elaine nodded eagerly, wiping her tears away. "Yes, Charmaine. We thought the business loan was just a formality for the trust. We would never try to trick you. We love you." I smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was a smile completely devoid of any warmth. "Really, Mother?" I asked, my voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. I tapped the audio application on my phone screen, selecting a specific file I had downloaded from the security system at my luxury rental house the week prior. "Let us roll the tape." The quiet beep of the phone speaker connecting to the maximum volume setting seemed to echo through the dining room. Every single relative held their breath, staring at the small device in my hand as if it were a live grenade. Elaine froze, her hand hovering in the air, her eyes darting nervously between the phone and my face. She did not know what recording I possessed, but the absolute certainty in my voice terrified her. She knew deep down that the web of lies she had spun was entirely fragile, and she was about to be exposed in front of the very people she desperately wanted to impress. The debt guillotine had already severed Trey's corporate head, and now the blade was being raised one final time for the matriarch of the family. The room waited in agonizing silence for the audio to begin playing. The room waited in agonizing silence for the audio to begin playing. I pressed the play button on my smartphone and set the volume to its absolute maximum capacity. The crisp, clear audio recording from the high-definition security doorbell camera at my luxury rental property began to broadcast across the destroyed dining room. The digital timestamp indicated it was recorded on the 5th evening of my abandoned visit. First, there was the sound of a heavy wooden door closing, followed by the distinct, sharp clicking of Chloe's expensive designer heels against a concrete porch. Then Chloe's voice filled the room. It was not the sweet, high-pitched influencer voice she used for her internet followers. It was the nasal, whiny tone she reserved strictly for our family behind closed doors. "Just leave her at the Airbnb, Mom," Chloe's recorded voice echoed loudly, bouncing off the crystal chandelier and the mahogany walls. "If we ignore her, she will feel guilty and just leave her credit cards and fly back to New York. She is just an ATM anyway." There was a brief rustling sound on the recording, followed immediately by the voice of my mother, Elaine. "Good idea, baby," Elaine's recorded voice replied, sounding completely relaxed and entirely devoid of any maternal concern or guilt. "Hand me the ribs." The short audio clip ended. I locked my phone screen and slipped it smoothly back into the pocket of my emerald green suit jacket. The silence that descended upon the dining room this time was entirely different from the shock that followed the property deed revelation. This was a heavy, suffocating silence born of pure, absolute revulsion. The audio recording had completely stripped away the final layer of their carefully constructed facade. There were no complex corporate acquisitions or misunderstood financial terms to debate here. This was raw, undeniable proof of their malicious intent. It was absolute, undeniable proof that they viewed me as nothing more than a disposable financial resource to be manipulated and discarded at their convenience. I watched the faces of my extended family members as the true weight of the recording settled over them. The relatives who had been aggressively judging me just an hour ago, the ones who had loudly agreed with Chloe's hypocritical toast about family loyalty, were now staring at Elaine and Chloe with unmasked disgust. The illusion of the loving matriarch and the perfect golden child had been violently ripped away, exposing the rotting, greedy core underneath. Aunt Beatrice was the first to physically react. The proud, gossiping matriarch of the Washington family stood up from her chair. Her movements were slow and rigid. She did not look angry anymore. She looked profoundly, deeply ashamed. She had allowed herself to be manipulated into attacking me in my own corporate office, based entirely on the lies manufactured by the two women currently weeping at the head of the table. Beatrice reached down and picked up her purple purse from the floor. She did not say a single word to Elaine. She did not offer a comforting glance to Derek. She simply turned her back on the entire spectacle and walked heavily out of the dining room, her footsteps echoing down the hallway toward the front door. Aunt Beatrice's silent departure was the catalyst. It was the official ruling from the jury. Uncle George stood up next, shaking his head slowly as he looked at his brother Derek, with a mixture of pity and contempt. "I cannot be a part of this," George said, his voice thick with disappointment. "You have poisoned your own well, Derek." George signaled to his wife, and they both immediately headed for the exit. "Cousin Darius." The young man who had aggressively demanded I apologize to the family stood up from his chair right next to me. He refused to make eye contact with me, his face burning red with humiliation. He practically sprinted out of the room, desperate to escape the toxic atmosphere. One by one, the remaining aunts, uncles, and cousins silently stood up from the lavish feast and abandoned the sinking ship. The grand Sunday dinner, the magnificent celebration of Black excellence and generational wealth, had turned into a mass exodus. Elaine watched her entire social circle walk out the front door. Her carefully cultivated reputation was completely destroyed. She reached out her hands, trembling wildly, grasping at empty air. "Wait," she pleaded, her voice cracking miserably. "Please do not leave. It is not what it sounds like. We were just joking. Please come back." But nobody turned around. Within 2 minutes, the massive dining room was entirely empty, except for the four of us. The sounds of car engines starting and tires rolling down the driveway signaled the absolute end of the Washington family dynasty. Derek remained frozen in his chair, staring vacantly at the ruined property deed, soaking in the macaroni and cheese. He was a completely broken man. With their audience entirely gone, Chloe and Trey had absolutely nothing left but their raw, panicked rage. The golden couple, the shining examples of modern success, were suddenly trapped in the wreckage of their own making. Chloe wiped her ruined makeup from her face, her sorrow instantly transforming back into vicious anger. She turned her entire body toward her husband, her eyes flashing with pure hatred. "This is all your fault," Chloe screamed, her voice echoing harshly in the empty dining room. "If you had not bankrupted your pathetic company, she would not have had the leverage to do this. You ruined my life, Trey. You promised me a wealthy lifestyle, and you delivered nothing but debt and humiliation. You are a complete failure of a man." Trey, who had been sitting in terrified silence, suddenly snapped. The loss of his company, the impending homelessness, and the public humiliation finally pushed him over the edge. He jumped to his feet, his chair crashing backward onto the hardwood floor. "Do not you dare put this on me, you spoiled, selfish brat!" Trey roared, his face contorting into an ugly mask of fury. "I bankrupted my company trying to keep up with your insane demands. You needed a new designer bag every single month. You needed to fly to luxury resorts just to take pictures for strangers on the internet. You drained every single dollar of profit I ever made." "You lied to me," Chloe shrieked, stepping aggressively toward him and shoving his chest hard with both hands. "You told me you were a millionaire. You told me you were building an empire. You used my parents' house as collateral without telling me. You are a disgusting fraud." "I used their house because you refused to downgrade your lifestyle," Trey yelled, shoving her hands away violently. You are nothing but a gold digger, Chloe. You only loved me when my credit cards were working. The minute the money stopped flowing, you turned into a vicious monster. You do not care about anyone but yourself. You do not even care about your own son. All you care about is your fake internet fame. They circled each other like rabid dogs, barking vicious insults and tearing down the remaining shreds of their marriage. The polished, sophisticated veneer they presented to the world was entirely gone, replaced by the ugly, terrifying reality of two deeply selfish individuals realizing they had absolutely nothing left to offer each other. Chloe screamed that she was going to file for divorce and take full custody of their child. Trey screamed back that she would not get a single dime in alimony because he was completely insolvent and she was entirely unhireable. They were completely destroying each other, and they had entirely forgotten that I was still standing in the room observing the carnage. I watched them tear each other apart, feeling absolutely nothing. There was no sadness, there was no joy. There was only the cold, satisfying finality of a surgical strike executed to absolute perfection. The cancer had been successfully removed. I looked over at my mother, Elaine. She was sitting slumped in her chair, her face buried in her hands, rocking back and forth as she listened to her golden child's marriage violently implode. The perfect daughter she had prioritized over me her entire life was currently screaming profanities like a sailor. The perfect son-in-law she had blindly trusted with her retirement fund was screaming right back. The legacy she had sacrificed my childhood to build was lying in ruins across the dining table. I took a slow, deep breath, filling my lungs with the stale air of the dining room. It was finally time to end this. I reached down and picked up my expensive leather briefcase from the floor. The sharp click of the brass latches opening echoed loudly, cutting through the sound of Chloe and Trey's screaming match. The noise startled them, forcing them to briefly pause their vicious argument and look in my direction. Derek slowly lifted his head from his hands, his eyes red and swollen. Elaine stopped rocking and stared at me with wide, terrified eyes. I stood up, perfectly straight, smoothing the front of my tailored emerald green skirt. I maintained an absolutely flawless posture, radiating the cold, untouchable authority of a woman who had just conquered her greatest enemy. "Well," I said, my voice perfectly calm and completely steady, slicing effortlessly through the heavy tension of the room. "This has certainly been a lovely 60th birthday, but we have some housekeeping to do." I reached into the front pocket of my leather briefcase and pulled out 3 thick white envelopes. I reached into the front pocket of my leather briefcase and pulled out 3 thick white envelopes. I held them up high in the air, letting the stark white paper contrast sharply against the dark mahogany wood of the dining table. I walked very slowly toward the head of the table, where my completely shattered family remained paralyzed in their seats. I tossed the very first envelope directly onto Trey's empty dinner plate. "That is a formal legal notice of absolute asset seizure, Trey," I explained, my voice entirely devoid of any human sympathy. "My corporate acquisition team is currently freezing every single bank account associated with your name and your fraudulent business empire. The moving trucks will arrive at your leased office space tomorrow morning at exactly 8 o'clock to collect the remaining physical assets. I highly suggest you cancel whatever luxurious golf game you had planned for this weekend." Trey did not even reach for the white envelope. He just stared down at it as if it were coated in a highly lethal poison. I then moved to my left, dropping the second envelope right in front of Chloe. Her beautiful makeup was entirely ruined, with dark streaks of expensive mascara running rapidly down her cheeks. "Open it right now, Chloe," I commanded. She flinched violently, but her trembling fingers slowly tore the thick paper open. She pulled out a detailed corporate invoice. "That is a legally binding bill for the $14,250 you stole from me," I stated clearly, so everyone could hear. "Since you publicly claimed you paid for Aunt Beatrice's hospital surgery with your own money and subsequently profited off that massive lie through increased social media engagement and brand sponsorships, you have officially committed financial fraud. You have exactly 30 days to reimburse my holding company in full. If you fail to produce the cash, I will file a massive civil lawsuit and aggressively garnish whatever future wages you manage to scrape together working a minimum wage job." Chloe let out a sharp, devastated wail, instantly burying her face back into her shaking hands. I finally turned my full attention to my parents. Derek was still staring vacantly at the ruined property deed soaking in the cold macaroni and cheese. Elaine was aggressively shaking her head back and forth, whispering quiet, desperate prayers to a god who was no longer listening. I placed the final white envelope right between them on the tablecloth. And, Mom, Dad, I said, my voice dropping to a cold, absolute 0. That is your formal 30-day eviction notice. The $0 lease agreement is officially permanently terminated. You have exactly 1 month to pack your belongings and vacate my property. The terrifying reality of their complete destruction finally settled heavily over them. Elaine practically threw herself across the large mahogany table, desperately reaching out to grab my emerald green suit jacket. "Charmaine, please!" she wailed loudly, her voice breaking into a hysterical, terrifying screech. "You absolutely cannot do this to us!" "Where will we go? We do not have any emergency savings left. Trey completely tied up all our retirement money in his failing business. We will be completely homeless. Please, baby, I am your mother." Derek finally snapped out of his deep catatonic state, standing up on incredibly shaky legs. He looked like an old, completely defeated man, entirely stripped of all his arrogant pride. "I am so sorry, Charmaine," he cried, thick, ugly tears rolling rapidly down his dark cheeks. "I am so incredibly sorry for everything we did to you. I was a foolish man. I was an arrogant father. Please just give us another chance to make things right. We can go to intense family counseling. We can fix this broken relationship." I looked at the two of them weeping openly. Society dictates that I should automatically forgive them. Society demands that because we share the exact same blood, I should absorb their deeply toxic behavior, overlook their extreme financial greed, and instantly embrace them with open, loving arms. But there is absolutely no genuine virtue in toxic forgiveness. Forgiving them today would only teach them that they could continue to abuse and manipulate me without facing any real lasting consequences. I slowly reached down and forcefully peeled my mother's clammy hands off my tailored jacket. "You treated me like a bank, Elaine," I said, my tone remaining perfectly level. "You treated me like an automated teller machine that existed solely to dispense unlimited cash for your perfect golden family. You completely ignored my feelings, you consistently dismissed my incredible professional achievements, and you ultimately conspired to steal my money. Well, the bank has officially foreclosed on your lives." I picked up my heavy leather briefcase and finally turned my back on the grand dining room. They continued to beg loudly. They cried uncontrollably. They pleaded desperately, begging for a basic mercy they had never once shown me. But I did not shed a single solitary tear. I did not look back over my shoulder. I walked confidently out of the formal dining room, straight down the wide hallway, and pushed open the heavy wooden front door. I stepped out into the warm southern Georgia night. The cool evening air tasted incredibly sweet. I took a massive deep breath, filling my lungs with actual free air for the very first time in my entire 35 years of life. I walked to my rented luxury vehicle, started the powerful engine, and drove away from the burning wreckage of the Washington family empire forever. Exactly 2 months later, the dust had fully settled, revealing the harsh, brutal daily reality of their completely ruined lives. The swift corporate execution I enacted left absolutely no room for any negotiation. Chloe was legally forced to delete her entire internet presence. The massive embarrassment of her fake wealthy lifestyle being publicly exposed spread like a wild, raging wildfire through all her elite social circles. Her massive diamond wedding ring was quickly pawned just to pay for a cheap local divorce attorney. She currently works exactly 40 hours a week, folding discounted sweaters at a mid-tier retail clothing store located in a dying suburban shopping mall. There are absolutely no more luxury beach vacations or expensive designer bags. There is only sore feet and a minimum wage reality. Trey, unfortunately, did not fare any better. When my corporate team officially seized his business assets, We uncovered a massive paper trail of falsified tax documents and heavily forged investor signatures. We legally handed the entire portfolio directly over to the federal authorities. Trey is currently facing multiple serious counts of felony wire fraud and corporate embezzlement. The arrogant alpha male chief executive officer is now fighting desperately to avoid a lengthy mandatory federal prison sentence while sleeping miserably on his childhood friend's torn living room couch. As for Derek and Elaine, the 30-day eviction notice was strictly and aggressively enforced. Because they had foolishly leveraged their entire retirement to back Trey's fraudulent commercial loan, they were left completely destitute. The bank swiftly seized their remaining checking accounts. They were terribly forced to pack up 40 long years of family memories into cheap cardboard boxes and move into a cramped, dirty one-bedroom apartment located in a highly undesirable neighborhood far away from their rich country club friends. The worst part of their punishment was the total social isolation. Aunt Beatrice made sure the entire extended family knew exactly what they had done. My parents are cut off from the family tree. Nobody calls them. Nobody invites them to Sunday dinner. They are left entirely alone, trapped in a tiny apartment with nothing but their bitter regrets. As for me, I am standing in the grand foyer of the massive mansion I legally repossessed. The Persian rugs and the crystal chandeliers are completely gone. The walls have been painted bright white, and the dining room has been transformed into a sleek conference center. This property is no longer a fake home built on lies and stolen money. It is the brand new Atlanta headquarters for my corporate holding firm. I established a philanthropic division operating out of this building. We offer massive financial grants and comprehensive business mentorship to actual Black female entrepreneurs who are building legitimate companies from the ground up. I look directly into the camera lens feeling more powerful and authentic than I ever have before. Blood makes you related, but loyalty makes you family. I say, my voice incredibly steady and resolute. If they only love you for what you can buy them, let them experience the exact price of losing you. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your ultimate peace? Tell me your stories in the comments below. And please always remember, your true worth is absolutely not tied to your wallet. I offer a triumphant smile. The screen fades entirely to black.